Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the most disturbing sexual practices of the medieval times, where the truth is far from the romanticized chivalry tales, and reveals the raw, unsettling customs that lie beneath the surface of history. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. The Middle Ages, a time when knights in shining armor were less concerned with rescuing damsels in distress and more preoccupied with a baffling set of social norms that could make anyone's head spin. Throw in the church's contradictory teachings, and you've got a recipe for some of the most peculiar sexual practices in history. So, let's unravel the misconceptions. Spoiler alert, it's not all about castles, chivalry, and courtly love. Sometimes, it's just about getting by without being labeled a heretic. Let's start with the church, the medieval moral compass that pointed in all directions at once. The church's stance on sexuality was a bit like a medieval feast, abundant in variety, unpredictable in its offerings, and often hard to stomach. While one sermon might extol the virtues of chastity, the next could delve into the intricacies of acceptable marital relations. And let's not forget the infamous decrees like the one from the Council of Trent, which in the 16th century declared that marriage was indeed a sacrament, an effort to rein in the wild west of nuptial arrangements. Now, speaking of marriage, medieval courtship rituals were a curious affair. Think less romantic strolls in the garden and more strategic alliances sealed with a handshake and possibly a dowry. Forget about Tinder. Matchmaking was more about land, power, and survival. A courtship was essentially a negotiation table with lace curtains. The wealthy would often exchange elaborate love letters, sometimes penned by professional scribes, because nothing says, "I love you," like outsourcing your feelings. But what about those chastity belts, the medieval symbol of absolute fidelity? Here's the twist. They probably didn't exist in the way popular culture tells us, despite the tantalizing idea of knights locking up their ladies before heading off to the Crusades. There's scant evidence to suggest these contraptions were widespread or effective. In fact, most of what survives today are likely 19th century inventions, more a product of Victorian imagination than medieval reality. Even the most devoted knight would think twice before giving his lady a piece of iron underwear. Talk about uncomfortable travel attire. The church's influence didn't stop with marriage. It seeped into the bedroom, dictating when, how, and even why couples could engage in certain activities. The church calendar was littered with so many feast days, fasts, and holy observances that if a couple actually managed to find a permissible time to get it on, it was nothing short of miraculous. Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays were typically off-limits, not to mention the entire 40 days of Lent. You might wonder how anyone managed to have children at all. And then there was the confessional, a place where sins of the flesh were laid bare. Priests were often tasked with the unenviable job of listening to the intimate details of their parishioners' lives. The penitentials, guides for confessors, were meticulous in their categorization of sins, with specific penances for each misdeed. For instance, adulterous behavior could land you a year of bread and water. But given the medieval diet, that might have just been par for the course. Let's not forget public morality versus private behavior, a medieval double standard as old as time itself. Publicly, everyone was expected to toe the church's line, but behind closed doors, well, let's just say the walls of medieval homes heard it all. While the church might preach abstinence, the reality was that people were people, driven by the same desires and foibles as today. The gap between doctrine and practice was often as wide as a knight's lance. It's easy to romanticize the past with images of noble knights and virtuous maidens, but the truth is, medieval sex was more about survival, power dynamics, and the church's watchful eye. It was a balancing act between heaven's rules and earthly desires, a dance that was anything but straightforward. Whether it's the myth of chastity belts or the complex web of courtship, medieval sexuality is a testament to the human condition in all its flawed glory. As we delve deeper into this era, remember, history is never as simple as it seems, and often it's the contradictions that tell the most interesting stories. So, buckle up, or don't, if you're relying on a chastity belt, and get ready for a journey through the peculiar, the perplexing, and the downright puzzling world of medieval sexual practices. While medieval sexuality was a wild ride involving ecclesiastical gymnastics, marriage was no less of a high-stakes game. Except here, the chips were often women and land, not love and affection. Welcome to the world where Cupid took a backseat, replaced by a shrewd financial advisor and a power-hungry diplomat. The medieval marriage market was less about heartstrings and more about purse strings. Picture the medieval maiden, her fate often sealed not by a valiant knight's kiss, but by the clink of coins and the stroke of a quill. Enter the dowry, the not-so-romantic baggage that came with the bride. This wasn't just pocket change. Families could be set back by up to 50% of their annual income to secure a good match, a hefty price tag when you consider the average noble household might earn about £200 a year. And what did this dowry buy? Not love or companionship, but a strategic alliance. Marriages were the medieval version of mergers and acquisitions, with a splash of familial feuds. Forget about roses and sweet serenades. The real aphrodisiac was fertile land and political clout. The nobility played a game of chess with their offspring as pawns, moving them across the board to secure territory or fortify alliances. The stakes were high. A misstep could lead to family ruin or even war. Women, in this grand chess game, were the ultimate strategic pieces. Their sexuality was less about personal agency and more about family legacy. It was as if every daughter came with a price tag and a map of Europe. Her virginity was scrutinized like a new car's mileage, an essential part of the deal. In a society where a woman's worth was tangled with her purity, the consequences of tarnishing that image were severe, not for the men, mind you, but for the women, who could find themselves shunned or worse. But let's not get too cynical without acknowledging the allure of courtly love, that luminous myth spun by troubadours and poets. Ah, courtly love, the original look, but don't touch policy. It was an elaborate dance of unrequited affection, where knights would pine for unattainable ladies, riding odes under moonlit balconies. Yet behind the poetry lay reality. These romances rarely resulted in marriage. They were often more about social status than true passion, a way for knights to display their sophistication and for ladies to boost their societal standing. Courtly love was a social script, a performance played out in the salons and courts. It provided an outlet for the upper classes to blow off steam in a world where marriages were more business transactions than fairy tales. But don't be fooled by the glamour. The reality was more akin to a medieval soap opera, complete with secret dalliances, jealous rivals, and the occasional scandal. Of course, all this maneuvering wasn't just for the fun of it. In a world where land equaled power, the economic ramifications were colossal. Marriages could consolidate power, expand territories, and even secure peace treaties. A well-placed marriage could be the difference between prosperity and poverty, or in extreme cases, life and death. The political landscape was as treacherous as a Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of fire-breathing in-laws. And let's not forget the church, the omnipresent referee in this game of matrimonial poker. With its fingers in every pie, the church dictated the rules of engagement, literally. It had the power to bless unions or dissolve them, often swayed by the same economic and political pressures that dictated marriages. The church's involvement ensured that marriages remain not just personal, but deeply political acts, sanctified by faith, yet driven by worldly desires. In this tangled web of alliances and dowries, love was often the last consideration. Yet the myth of the noble knight and his fair lady persists, a romantic veneer over a grittier reality of negotiations and power plays. It's a testament to the enduring human desire for stories that uplift, even when history serves up a more sobering narrative. So, next time you find yourself swept away by tales of medieval romance, remember, sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that lie beneath the surface, where the heartstrings and purse strings converge in a dance as complex as life itself. Stay tuned, because we're diving further into this labyrinth of medieval passion and pragmatism, where the stakes are high, and the reality is often as thrilling as the legend. So, with the medieval chessboard set, and the pieces in motion, it's time to flip the board and look at what's lurking underneath. the legal and medical perspectives on sex in the medieval era. Spoiler alert, it's a bizarre blend of the absurd, the punitive, and the downright dangerous. Let's start with the law, a medieval tapestry woven with threads of religion, superstition, and a touch of medieval logic that makes one wonder if an inebriated jester had a hand in it. Picture this. In 1257, a law in England stated that a man could not marry his cousin's widow. Why, you ask? Because apparently marrying a cousin's widow was akin to marrying the cousin himself. Forget familial love. This was more like familial gymnastics, with legal acrobatics that defy modern comprehension. And then there were the ecclesiastical courts, the church's very own legal system, where sins of the flesh were tried with the solemnity of a monk deciding between penance and perdition. Adultery, that could land you a hefty fine, public penance, or even excommunication. Yet, in an ironic twist, these courts often offered more leniency than their secular counterparts. After all, what's a little indiscretion when eternity's at stake? For women, these laws were a double-edged sword. Sure, they offered some protection. Adultery laws could be wielded against a neglectful husband, but they also reinforced rigid control over female sexuality. In some regions, a woman accused of infidelity could face trial by ordeal. Yes, you heard that right, trial by ordeal. Imagine being dunked in a river and told that if you floated, you were guilty because water, being pure, rejected impurities. If you sank, innocent, but also, passably dead. Now let's dive into the murky waters of medieval medicine, a world where the cure was sometimes worse than the disease. The medieval medical scene was an odd cocktail of ancient Greek theories, local folk remedies, and a healthy dose of trial and error, mostly error. Take, for instance, the concept of humours, which dictated that human health depended on a balance of bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one. Expect a leeching session to balance the scales. It was less about healing and more about medieval plumbing. Sexual health, or what passed for it, was often a target of these dubious practices. Consider the perplexing advice found in the writings of Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess and polymath, who suggested using crushed herbs and gems as aphrodisiacs, because nothing says romance like swallowing a ground-up sapphire with your mead. Sure, it sounds magical, but in reality, it was more likely to empty your purse than fill your heart. And then there were the more dangerous remedies. Treatments for impotence included such gems as concoctions of rooster testicles or the application of heart irons. Not exactly the kind of spa day you'd wish for. For women, the situation was equally grim. Menstrual issues might be treated with a mix of pulverized toad and ale. If you're thinking you're not alone. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, a 15th century witch-hunting manual, even suggested that certain ailments, like impotence, could be the result of witchcraft. Naturally, the cure was to find the offending witch and, remove her from the equation. It's a chilling reminder of how superstition and fear could shape medical practices, sometimes with deadly results. But let's not write off medieval medicine entirely. There were some bright spots in this otherwise murky landscape. For example, midwives, often women with extensive knowledge of herbs and childbirth, provided valuable services despite the era's often misogynistic attitudes. They were the unsung heroes, navigating a world that was quick to blame them for any mishaps, but slow to recognize their expertise. And let's not forget the influence of Islamic medicine, which, during the medieval period, was far ahead of its European counterparts. Scholars like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, whose canon of medicine was a medical encyclopedia, offered insights that would eventually trickle into Europe, albeit slowly. These texts introduced more scientific approaches, emphasizing observation and experimentation, radical ideas in an era more familiar with rote memorization and superstition. So, what do we make of all this? The medieval world was a place where law and medicine intersected with religion and superstition, creating a complex web of practices and beliefs. It was a time when a misplaced belief could lead to tragedy, and a stroke of luck, or a wise midwife, could save a life. The laws and medical practices were as much about control as they were about care, reflecting a society grappling with human nature's complexities. As we continue our journey through this labyrinth of medieval passion and pragmatism, remember, the past is never just black and white. It's a tapestry of contradictions, where the bizarre and the brilliant coexist, and and where the stories are as intricate as the lives they depict. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in this fascinating era where the stakes were high, and the reality was often stranger than fiction. As we plunge into the murkier waters of medieval life, brace yourself for the notorious underbelly, prostitution. This was no secret affair conducted under the cover of darkness. It was a thriving industry woven into the very fabric of medieval society. Far from being a mere backdrop to the chivalric tales of yore, prostitution was a bustling enterprise, and the church, ever the reluctant chaperone, tried to whip this unruly sector into something resembling order. Prostitution during the Middle Ages was a tale of necessity, survival, and let's face it, a bit of entrepreneurial spirit. With cities like London and Paris housing thousands of sex workers, it's clear that this wasn't some niche market. Prostitution was a legitimate, albeit frowned upon, part of urban economies, providing services to everyone from merchants to monarchs. In fact, a 14th century Parisian document records about 500 brothels, a staggering number when you consider the city's population hovered around 200,000. But let's not romanticize this as a medieval version of sex and the city. For many women, turning to prostitution was less about glamour and more about grim necessity. In a world where social safety nets were as rare as dragon sightings, selling one's body was often the only means to an end. Widows, abandoned wives, and single women found themselves in a precarious position, and prostitution offered a way to keep starvation at bay, even if just barely. The church, that ever-present moral compass, had a complicated relationship with the world's oldest profession. On one hand, it condemned the practice as sinful, a one-way ticket to eternal damnation. On the other hand, it recognized that attempting to eradicate it entirely would be as futile as a jousting match without a lance. So, in a bizarre twist, the church opted for regulation instead of outright prohibition. After all, better the devil you know, right? This regulation often meant designating specific areas for brothels, a kind of medieval red light district, if you will. Take, for example, the Southwark area in London, where brothels were officially sanctioned by the Bishop of Winchester, hence the term Winchester geese for the women working there. The church collected taxes from these establishments, turning a tidy profit while supposedly keeping immorality under control. Who knew a vow of poverty came with such lucrative side benefits? But let's not get too comfortable with the idea of medieval tolerance. The church's regulatory approach didn't mean sex workers were off the hook. Far from it. They occupied a bizarre liminal space in society, tolerated but not accepted, necessary yet despised. The stigma was intense, and punishments for stepping out of line could be severe. Public shaming was a popular pastime, with offenders paraded through the streets, often with their heads shaved, as a warning to others. And while the church was busy balancing its books and its morals, secular laws were equally unforgiving. A sex worker caught plying her trade outside the sanctioned zones could face harsh penalties, including imprisonment or even death. It was a grim reminder that while the service might have been in demand, those providing it were far from respected. The treatment of sex workers was emblematic of the broader social dynamics at play. Social class dictated everything from who you could marry to how you were punished. The nobility might engage in dalliances with impunity, their transgressions tucked away behind castle walls, but a peasant caught in similar circumstances faced far harsher consequences. It was a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, with the upper echelons of society setting the rules they had no intention of following. This double standard extended beyond the bedroom. Adultery, for example, was a crime that could lead to severe punishment for women, while men often got off with little more than a slap on the wrist. In some places, a woman accused of adultery might be forced to wear a special garment marking her as a sinner, a scarlet letter of sorts, while her male counterpart went unmarked. It was a man's world, and women paid the price. Despite these inequities, the stories of medieval debauchery and excess that have trickled down through the ages often skew the historical record. Urban legends abound, painting a picture of a time when everyone was either a saint or a sinner, with little room for the complexities of real life. These tales may be entertaining, but they rarely capture the gritty realities faced by those living in the era. Consider the legend of the Feast of Fools, a supposedly raucous celebration where clergy and laity alike supposedly engaged in all manner of debauched activities. While it's true that this festival existed, its reputation as a medieval bacchanal owes more to the imaginations of later writers than to historical fact. In reality, it was more akin to a carnival, a brief respite from the strictures of daily life, complete with jesters and games, but hardly the orgy of sin it's been made out to be. Likewise, the infamous medieval orgy is more fiction than fact. Sure, there were instances of excessive revelry, but the notion of a society perpetually on the brink of moral collapse is more a reflection of modern fascination with the past than any historical truth. Medieval people had their vices, just as we do today, but they also had rules, customs, the deep-seated fear of damnation that kept most in line. As we unravel the tangled web of medieval sexual practices, it becomes clear that the past was as complex as the present. Myths and legends offer tantalizing glimpses into a world of supposed excess, but the reality was often far more mundane and far more human. The medieval era was a time of contradictions, where the sacred and the profane, the pious and the pragmatic, coexisted in a delicate dance. So, as we continue our exploration, keep in mind that history is rarely a simple tale of black and white. It's a spectrum of shades, where the truth often lies somewhere in the middle, waiting to be uncovered. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this labyrinthine world, where every answer seems to raise a dozen more questions, and the line between myth and reality is as blurred as a monk after a night of too much mead. And so, as we sit back and ponder the medieval tapestry of love and lust, one can't help but marvel at its enduring legacy. The world of yore, with its lace-curtained courtships and church-sanctioned brothels, left an indelible mark on the societal norms we navigate today. The big question is, just how much has really changed beneath our modern veneer of progress? Let's start with marriage, the medieval merger and acquisition that morphed into our modern-day nuptials. While we may no longer barter brides for land or political favor, well, at least not openly, echoes of the past still resonate. Consider the wedding industry, a juggernaut that would make even a medieval dowry blush. In the U.S., the average wedding costs around $30,000, a staggering sum that would have bought you a small manor in 12th century England. We've traded dowries for diamond rings and lavish ceremonies, but the showy spectacle remains. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? And what of that courtly love, the medieval version of an Instagram love letter? Today, we swipe right for romance, but the game of appearances persists. Social media is our digital stage, where we perform love in curated snapshots and hashtag declarations. Knights once penned sonnets under starry skies. Now, we craft tweets in the glow of our screens. The medium evolves, but the desire to display devotion remains. Love, it seems, is as much about the public performance as the private sentiment. Now, let's not forget the Church's grip on sexual morality, a grip that has certainly loosened, but not entirely relinquished its hold. While we no longer consult the ecclesiastical calendar to plan our intimate encounters, thankfully, the echoes of religious prescription still ripple through societal norms. Think about it. Debates over contraception, marriage rights, and reproductive health are still framed in moral terms that would make a medieval bishop nod in recognition. We've swapped the confessional for the court of public opinion, yet the dialogue is strikingly familiar. And then there's the matter of gender roles, a medieval relic that has proven stubbornly resilient. The Middle Ages were nothing if not a man's world, where women were pawns in the great game of power and prestige. Fast forward to today, and while we've made strides towards gender equality, the remnants of medieval misogyny linger. Wage gaps, glass ceilings, and societal expectations continue to echo the past, reminding us that progress is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a sobering thought. We may have traded corsets for power suits, but the struggle for true parity persists. Now, let's turn our gaze to the legal landscape, a peculiar fusion of medieval morality and modern jurisprudence. While we no longer dunk witches or impose trial by ordeal, thank goodness, the legacy of punitive justice lingers. Consider the ongoing debates around punishment versus rehabilitation, or the moralistic overtones in legal discourse. The scales of justice may be more balanced today, But the shadow of the past looms large, a reminder of the tumultuous journey from retribution to reform. And what about the world's oldest profession? Prostitution, once a necessary evil reluctantly tolerated, remains a societal conundrum. Today, debates rage about legalization, human rights, and public health, a complex web of issues that would bewilder a medieval bishop trying to tally his brothel tax. The industry may have gone from shadowy alleyways to internet platforms, but the fundamental questions of morality and regulation remain. As we peel back the layers of history, it's clear that the Middle Ages were not just a time of knights and castles, but a crucible for the social norms we grapple with today. The Romanticism of yesteryear, with its chivalric tales and troubadour tunes, casts a long shadow over our collective imagination, obscuring the gritty reality of a world defined by survival and control. Yet, it's this very tension between the myth and the reality that makes history so endlessly fascinating. So, as we draw the curtain on our medieval exploration, what can we take away? Perhaps it's the realization that human nature, with all its complexities and contradictions, remains remarkably consistent. The same desires, fears, and ambitions that drove medieval society continue to shape our world. We've swapped chainmail for business suits and parchment for pixels, but at our core, we're still wrestling with the same age-old dilemmas. In the end, history is not a distant land to be visited, but a mirror reflecting our own lives. By understanding the past, we gain insight into the present, and perhaps a little wisdom for the future. So next time you're swept away by tales of medieval romance or scandal, remember, beneath the pageantry lies a human story as rich and complex as our own. And with that, dear listener, I leave you to ponder the legacy of medieval sexual norms, a tapestry woven with threads of myth, reality, and everything in between. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking the stories that shape our world. Lai Yun probably didn't wake up one morning in 618 AD thinking, you know what, I could really go for a dynasty today. But that's kind of how things shook out. In a world packed with political chaos, like a Beijing market on a Saturday, Lai Yun decided it was high time he reorganized the chaos into something a bit more dynastic. And thus began the Tang Dynasty, a golden era of Chinese history that makes Game of Thrones look like a gentle family picnic. Let's set the scene. The Sui dynasty was crumbling faster than a biscuit in tea. The Emperor Yangdi had a knack for building massive, expensive projects like the Grand Canal, which was fantastic for trade, but terrible for the imperial bank account. He managed to alienate just about everyone, from the peasants to the nobility, with his reckless spending and military failures. By the time Lai Yuan, a savvy general and governor, decided to throw his hat into the ring, the political landscape was like a rickety Jenga tower. One wrong move, and it was all gonna come crashing down. Now, Lai Yun wasn't just some guy with a sword and a dream. He had a pedigree, a cushy job, and a family with serious ambitions. But it was his son, Lai Shimin, who really had the Medes' touch when it came to turning family squabbles into political gold. Lai Shimin was the kind of guy who could sell sand in the desert. He had the charisma of a rock star and the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster. And he was about to take the family drama to a whole new level. You see, the Tang's rise wasn't just about beating the Sui. It was about uniting a fractured China, which was about as easy as herding cats. The country was divided into various warlord territories and rebellious states, all with their own agendas. Lai Yuan declared himself Emperor Geazu, marking the official beginning of the Tang dynasty. But it was Lai Shimin who would eventually turn this new dynasty into China's golden age. Spoiler alert, it wasn't without a little bloodshed. The Tang's secret sauce was a combination of military prowess, political alliances, and a bit of good old-fashioned sibling rivalry. Lai Shimin, who later became Emperor Taizong, wasn't shy about taking out the competition, literally. The infamous Xuanwu Gate incident in 626 AD saw Lai Shimin ambush and kill his brothers Lai Jiansheng and Lai Yuanji. Why? Well, they were in his way, and in the cutthroat world of ancient Chinese politics, that was reason enough. But let's not judge too harshly. This was a time when brotherly love often came with a side of betrayal and a dash of regicide. In the end, Lai Shimin emerged victorious, and the Tang dynasty was solidified under his rule. He's remembered as one of China's greatest emperors, a leader who expanded the empire and established a stable government that promoted culture, trade, and technology. Under the Tang, China became a cultural powerhouse. The Silk Road was bustling with merchants, monks, and travelers, turning the empire into a melting pot of ideas and innovations. This was an era when poetry wasn't just for the romantically inclined, it was a national pastime. Tang poets like Lai Bai and Du Fu pen verses that are still revered today. Yet, amidst this cultural renaissance, the Tang rulers had to keep a sharp eye on the family drama brewing at home. The court was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing, with power struggles that could rival any daytime soap opera. Maintaining control over such a vast and diverse empire required not just military might, but also diplomatic finesse and a keen understanding of human nature. So, why does the Tang Dynasty matter? Well, aside from giving us a treasure trove of poetry and art, the Tang set the stage for a unified China that would influence the world for centuries. They laid down the political and cultural foundations that would endure long after the dynasty itself faded into history. In the end, the Tang Dynasty was a testament to the power of turning chaos into order, of rising above the fray to create something lasting and magnificent. It was a time of great achievement, but also of great complexity, where the lines between legend and reality often blurred. And that, dear listener, is why the Tang Dynasty remains one of the most fascinating periods in Chinese history. A glittering era born out of chaos, ambition, and yes, a little bit of family drama. Now, if you think the Tang Dynasty was all poetry and calligraphy, think again. This was a time when the empire was flexing its economic muscles like a bodybuilder on protein powder. Let's start with the Silk Road, the ancient highway that was about as essential to trade as Wi-Fi is to millennials. This wasn't just some dusty caravan route. It was a bustling artery of commerce that pumped prosperity straight into the heart of the empire. The Tang Dynasty took the Silk Road and turned it up to 11. They expanded it, secured it, and made sure it was as busy as a Beijing street market. Goods flowed like water, silk, spices, ceramics, and even something as mundane as paper. This wasn't just a trade route. It was a cultural exchange on steroids. Scholars, monks, and merchants traveled alongside goods, spreading ideas faster than a viral TikTok video. And all this movement translated into serious kaching for the Tang economy, boosting the empire's GDP to heights that would make modern economists drool. But wait, there's more. The Tang weren't just about buying and selling. They were tax maestros, playing fiscal symphonies that would make even the sharpest modern accountant nod in approval. Their taxation system was a thing of beauty, unlike the tax forms we fill out today, which are more like a horror movie script. The Tang implemented the equal field system, where land was divided and distributed to households based on the number of people. This wasn't just a Robin Hood-style redistribution. It was a cunning way to ensure everyone paid their dues, filling the imperial coffers without bleeding the peasants dry. Now, let's talk about a little leaf that changed the world. Tea. Yes, the Tang Dynasty was the era when tea became the ancient equivalent of Starbucks. Forget your triple-shot soy latte. Back then, a cup of tea was the ultimate social lubricant, the beverage that fueled poetry readings and political debates alike. It was an economic powerhouse, too, with entire supply chains dedicated to its cultivation, processing, and transportation. Tea taxes were as hot as the brew itself, and they poured money into the treasury faster than you can say Earl Grey. The Tang's economic genius didn't stop there. They had a bureaucratic system so slick it could give any modern government a run for its money. Picture a civil service exam that was the original SAT, minus the multiple-choice questions and the college admission anxiety. The Tang exams were grueling, designed to select the brightest minds to run this vast empire. They tested knowledge of Confucian classics, poetry, and even calligraphy. If you could survive this intellectual gauntlet, you earned a role in the government, making policy decisions that could affect millions. This meritocratic system was revolutionary, ensuring that governance wasn't just a family affair, but a national best-in-class competition. Of course, this system wasn't without its stressors. The pressure was intense, the stakes high. Imagine cramming Confucian philosophy and poetry into your brain while knowing your future depended on it. This wasn't just about passing a test. It was about securing your family's social status and financial future. And for those who failed, well, let's just say the ancient equivalent of moving back into your parents' basement was a very real possibility. But all this brilliance wasn't just for show. The Tang Dynasty used their economic might to fuel an empire that was both culturally vibrant and technologically advanced. Innovations in agriculture, like the development of new rice strains, meant more food, and therefore more people to tax and more soldiers to recruit. Talk about a win-win-win situation. And let's not forget the infrastructure. The Tang invested in roads, canals, and postal systems that made communication across this sprawling empire as efficient as possible. This wasn't just about moving goods and people. It was about maintaining control, ensuring that the emperor's reach extended to the furthest corners of the realm. It was a logistical masterpiece. In the end, the Tang Dynasty was an economic juggernaut, a period of prosperity and innovation that set the stage for centuries of Chinese history. They turned trade routes into gold mines, taxed with finesse, and brewed tea into a cultural staple. All of this, wrapped in a bureaucratic system that was as efficient as it was ruthless. The Tang Dynasty was more than just a golden age. It was an era that redefined power and prosperity on a scale that would influence the world for generations. But don't get too comfortable in this prosperity bubble. The Tang Dynasty still had its share of drama and intrigue. The economy might have been booming, but human nature being what it is, power struggles and political backstabbing were never far behind. Stay tuned, because the story of the Tang Dynasty is far from over. There's plenty more to uncover in this saga of ambition, innovation, and yes, a bit of cutthroat politics. But just when you thought the Tang Dynasty was going to ride off into the sunset on a silk-lined chariot, sipping tea and quoting Confucius, the plot thickens with a cultural explosion that put the golden in golden age. Let's dive into this world where poetry was as potent as politics, and painters were practically wielding brushes like swords. Meet Lai Bai and Du Fu, the Lennon and McCartney of Tang poetry. Lai Bai, often called the immortal poet, was the kind of guy who could turn a drinking binge into a masterpiece. Picture a rock star with a quill wandering through mountains, composing verses that were as intoxicating as the wine he loved. His poems celebrated nature and the human spirit, capturing moments with such clarity that you could almost feel the breeze rustling through ancient pines. Then there's Du Fu, the poet-historian who chronicled the gritty realities of Tang life with an unflinching pen. While Lai Bai was off romancing the stars, Du Fu was scribbling about famine, social injustice, and the harshness of war. His work was like a social commentary wrapped in elegant verse, a poetic punch to the gut that made you think while you marveled at his craft. These poets didn't just write for kicks. They were engaged in a literary dialogue with the powers that be. Their verses critiqued the government, lamented the plight of the common folk, and celebrated the beauty of the land, all while navigating the treacherous waters of imperial favor and disfavor. It was a time when words could be as sharp as any blade, and the pen indeed was mighty. But poetry wasn't the only art form flourishing like a Tang peony. Painting, calligraphy, and music were also riding high on the cultural wave. Artists like Wu Deiazi, known as the Sage of Painting, were creating works so vivid they practically leaped off the canvas. His murals were legendary, filled with dynamic figures and intricate details that captured the grandeur of the Tang era. Wu Deiazi's work was more than just eye candy. It was a visual narrative of the dynasty's achievements and aspirations. Meanwhile, Buddhism was reshaping the spiritual landscape like an ancient tectonic shift. This wasn't just a religious movement, it was a cultural revolution. Monasteries popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, becoming centers of learning and art. Buddhist teachings influenced everything from philosophy to sculpture, and the religion's focus on compassion and enlightenment found a receptive audience in Tang society. But before you light incense and start chanting sutras, let's talk about the flip side. Buddhism's rise was not without controversy. The religion's wealth and influence grew so vast that it made the government a little twitchy. Monasteries owned significant land, and their tax-exempt status was like a thorn in the side of imperial accountants. At one point, there were over 600 monasteries and 40,000 temples, employing monks and nuns who were effectively out of the tax loop. In an empire where tax revenue was king, this was a big deal. Enter Emperor Wuzong, who in 845 AD decided he'd had enough of Buddhism's freeloading antics in a move that would make modern-day tax reformers proud. He initiated the great anti-Buddhist persecution, closing monasteries and redistributing land back to the state. It was a harsh reminder that in the Tang Dynasty, even spirituality had to pay its dues. Speaking of grand projects with mixed reviews, let's pivot to the Grand Canal, a marvel of engineering that could either be seen as the dynasty's crowning achievement or its white elephant. Stretching over 100 miles from Hangzhou in the south to Beijing in the north, the canal was the ancient equivalent of a 6-lane highway. It connected the fertile south with the capital, facilitating the movement of grain, troops, and information with unprecedented efficiency. But, and there's always a but, building the Grand Canal was no walk in the park. It required the labor of millions, many of whom were conscripted to work under brutal conditions. The canal's construction was as much a feat of human endurance as it was of engineering. Critics argue it was an exercise in government overreach, a vanity project that drained resources and lives. Yet, for all its controversy, the canal played a crucial role in unifying the vast empire, proving that sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make a grand imperial omelet. So, what does this cultural blossoming tell us about the Tang Dynasty? It was an era where art and politics danced a delicate waltz, where beauty and brutality coexisted in a precarious balance. The Tang rulers, ever the pragmatists, understood that culture was not just about aesthetics. It was a tool for shaping society, for inspiring loyalty, and for critiquing power. In this dynamic environment, artists and intellectuals thrived, leaving a legacy that still resonates today. The poetry, painting, and philosophy of the Tang era serve as a testament to the dynasty's enduring influence, a reminder that even in a world of political machinations and economic ambitions, there was room for beauty, introspection, and innovation. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Tang Dynasty, remember that this was a period where every brushstroke, every verse, and every stone laid in the Grand Canal was part of a larger tapestry, a complex, multifaceted narrative that defies easy categorization. Stay tuned, because the Tang story is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue, innovation, and yes, a bit of drama waiting in the wings. Now, as we turn the page to another chapter of the Tang Dynasty saga, let's dive into the explosive world of technological advances and military might that defined this era. And by explosive, I mean literally, because this is where gunpowder enters the scene. Yeah, that's right. The Tang Dynasty wasn't just about silk and poetry. It was also about sparks and bangs. Alchemists, in their quest for immortality, stumbled upon a concoction that would forever change the landscape of warfare. Their recipe of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur might not have granted eternal life, but it did create a substance that would go on to fuel everything from fireworks to firearms. Gunpowder was the accidental innovation of the century, a Tang tech startup that exploded onto the scene, sometimes quite literally. It wasn't long before the military applications became apparent. The Chinese were using gunpowder in warfare as early as 904 AD, launching incendiary devices that added a new level of wow factor to their military exploits. Forget about the sword fights of yore. This was the beginning of warfare with a bang. Speaking of military exploits, let's chat about the Tang Dynasty's penchant for flexing its muscles. The Tang military was like the ancient world's version of a superpower, boasting an army that could rival the best of them. At its peak, the Tang military was a well-oiled machine with around 500 troops ready to protect the empire's vast borders and interests. They weren't just sitting around sipping tea, either. The Tang expanded their influence into Central Asia, Korea, and beyond, showcasing their prowess and securing trade routes that were as vital as Wi-Fi in a coffee shop today. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Cue the ominous music, the Enlushan Rebellion. This was the plot twist that no one saw coming. Enlushan, a Tang general of Sogdian and Gurktuak descent, went from being a trusted military commander to leading one of the most devastating rebellions in Chinese history. In 755 AD, declared himself emperor of a new dynasty, the Yan, and all hell broke loose. His rebellion lasted until 763 AD, ravaging the empire and causing the deaths of millions. The Anlushan rebellion was the Tang dynasty's version of a midlife crisis, except instead of buying a sports car, it was more about losing control of a sprawling empire. The rebellion exposed the Tang's vulnerabilities, highlighting how their military might, once their greatest strength, could also be their Achilles heel. The empire was stretched thin, and the internal strife left it as vulnerable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Despite the chaos, the Tang dynasty's era of innovation continued to push boundaries. This was the time when woodblock printing started to take hold, revolutionizing the way information was disseminated. Imagine being able to produce texts in bulk without the painstaking process of hand-copying each one. This was the Gutenberg moment of the Tang era, accelerating the spread of knowledge like never before. The Diamond Sutra, printed in 868 AD, is the world's oldest known printed book, a testament to the Tang's forward-thinking spirit. These technological advancements weren't just about gadgets and gizmos. They were about shaping a society that was increasingly interconnected. The ability to share ideas and knowledge quickly and widely was akin to the internet revolution of our own time. It was a game changer, laying the groundwork for future generations to build upon. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of innovation. The Tang dynasty was also a time of stark realities and tough lessons. The Anlushan rebellion left the empire weakened, a shadow of its former glory. The financial toll was immense, draining resources and leaving the state coffers emptier than a late-night noodle shop. The aftermath saw a rise in regional warlords, each vying for power in a landscape that was increasingly fragmented. The Tang, despite their technological and cultural achievements, were learning the hard way that even the mightiest empire is only as strong as its weakest link. Their reliance on military prowess was a double-edged sword, one that could protect and conquer, but also destabilize and destroy. The rebellion underscored the importance of internal stability and the dangers of overextension, lessons that resonate with empires throughout history. In the end, the Tang dynasty's foray into technology and military expansion was a mixed bag of triumphs and tribulations. They gave us gunpowder, printing, and a blueprint for empire building that would influence countless others. Yet, they also showed us that with great power comes great responsibility, and sometimes great catastrophe. The Tang story is far from over, and as we continue to peel back the layers, remember that this was an era where the lines between genius and folly were often blurred, a time where the pursuit of greatness was both a blessing and a curse. Stay tuned, because the Tang dynasty still has a few more surprises up its intricately embroidered sleeve. As the Tang dynasty clinked its last cups of celebratory tea, the empire was already beginning to wobble like a top that's lost its spin. By the time the calendar turned to the 9th century, the signs were as clear as a Beijing smog day. The Tang were in trouble. The Anlushan rebellion had left a scar deeper than any cosmetic dynasty makeover could hide, and it didn't take a Confucian scholar to see that the imperial machine was running on fumes. Let's dive into the bureaucratic bloat that would make any modern-day government look like a lean, mean efficiency machine. As the Tang rulers struggled to maintain their grip on power, the bureaucracy swelled to enormous proportions. Think of it as an ancient version of corporate bloat, where the number of officials seemed to multiply faster than you could say imperial decree. By the late Tang period, there were over 36,000 officials on the government payroll, each with their own agendas, rivalries, and schemes. The empire was being administered by a veritable army of pencil pushers, and not all of them were playing for the home team. And here's the kicker. The Tang emperors, in a bid to keep everyone happy, started doling out titles and land like candy at a parade. This might sound great in theory, what's a little land between friends, but it led to a tangled mess of conflicting loyalties and power struggles that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fan wince. Noble families amassed significant power, and soon the emperor's influence was about as potent as a watered-down cup of tea. Of course, the Tang couldn't just blame their bureaucratic woes for their downfall. They also faced external pressures that would test any empire's mettle. The formidable Tibetan Empire was breathing down their necks, flexing its muscle on the western frontiers, while the kitten and other nomadic groups were proving to be persistent thorns in the empire's side. It's hard to keep the peace at home when your neighbors are knocking on the door with less than friendly intentions. Internally, the peasants, those unsung heroes of history who often get the short end of the stick, were getting restless, with taxes rising faster than the emperor's frustration levels, and natural disasters like floods and droughts adding insult to injury. The rural population was reaching its breaking point. Imagine being squeezed by taxes at one end and nature's wrath at the other. It's enough to make anyone consider rebellion as a viable career path. Cue the Huang Kao Rebellion, a peasant uprising that kicked off in 874 AD and raged for a decade. Huang Kao, a failed examination candidate with a chip on his shoulder and a knack for rallying the discontented, led this charge. His rebellion saw the sacking of major cities, including the capital, Chang'an, which was left a smoldering ruin. The rebellion exposed the Tang's weaknesses like a spotlight on a stage, and by the time it fizzled out, the dynasty's prestige was in tatters. Now, let's talk about one of the most critical lessons the Tang dynasty offers to us modern folks, the importance of balance. The Tang had achieved dizzying heights, but they were brought low by the very strengths that had propelled them to greatness. Their expansive bureaucracy, military might, and cultural achievements were remarkable, but they also became liabilities when left unchecked and unbalanced. It's a classic case of too much of a good thing turning sour, like that third slice of cake you definitely didn't need. The Tang's decline was a lesson in the dangers of overexpansion and the necessity of adaptability. Empires, much like people, need to evolve or face the consequences. The Tang's inability to adapt to changing internal and external pressures spelled their doom. It's a timeless reminder that resting on laurels is a surefire way to end up with a crick in your neck and a kingdom in ruins. As the Tang dynasty finally crumbled in 907 AD, it left behind a legacy as complex as the empire itself. Their innovations in governance, culture, and technology had a lasting impact on China and the world. The civil service examination system they refined became a staple of Chinese bureaucracy for centuries, influencing not just China, but other cultures that looked eastward for inspiration. This meritocratic approach, despite its flaws, was a revolutionary concept that democratized access to power, at least in theory. Culturally, the Tang period was a beacon of artistic and intellectual achievement. The poetry, art, and innovations from this era continued to inspire generations long after the dynasty's fall. The Tang's embrace of multiculturalism and trade left a lasting imprint on Chinese society, fostering a spirit of openness and exchange that would shape the country's interactions with the world. The Tang dynasty's story is a testament to the dual nature of human achievement, glorious yet fraught with peril. It's a saga where ambition meets reality, where the pursuit of greatness is tempered by the sobering lessons of history. The Tang's rise and fall remind us that empires are built by human hands, and as such, they are subject to the same triumphs and foibles that define all human endeavors. In the end, the Tang dynasty's legacy is woven into the very fabric of Chinese culture and history. Its echoes can still be heard in the bustling markets, the verses of ancient poems, and the enduring structures of governance that continue to shape China today. It's a legacy that speaks of boundless creativity and the relentless pursuit of excellence, tempered by the knowledge that even the mightiest can fall when they forget the lessons of balance and adaptability. So, as we close the chapter on the Tang dynasty, let's raise a cup of tea to this remarkable era, a time of innovation, inspiration, and inevitable decline. The Tang may have faded into history, but their story endures, a timeless reminder of the heights humans can reach and the depths they must navigate. And that, dear listener, is the legacy of the Tang dynasty, a golden era that burned brightly, teaching us lessons as relevant today as they were over a millennium ago. In the dusty corridors of history, you'll find Avicenna, a prodigious brainiac who devoured Aristotle's works while the rest of us were still figuring out basic algebra. Born in 980 AD in the bustling region of Bukhara, modern-day Uzbekistan, this guy was the Renaissance man before the Renaissance was even a thing. By the tender age of 16, when most of us were busy rebelling by staying up past bedtime. Avicenna was busy mastering not just one, but the entire Greek canon of philosophy. If that's not the ultimate teenage rebellion, I don't know what is. Avicenna's youthful brilliance wasn't just a happy accident. He was born into a world that was an absolute hotspot of culture and knowledge, the Islamic Golden Age. Think of it like Silicon Valley, but for philosophers and scientists. It was a time when the Abbasid Caliphate, with its capital in Baghdad, was all about that intellectual life. Scholars were the rock stars of the era, and the caliphs were their biggest fanboys, throwing patronage at them like confetti. And why not? The Silk Road was bringing in goods, ideas, and people from far and wide, making the region a melting pot of innovation and thought. Now, let's talk numbers. The Abbasid Caliphate stretched over 4,000 kilometers, covering parts of modern-day Middle East, North Africa, and even Spain. Their cultural exchange was about as wide as their empire, bringing texts and ideas from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond. As for the Silk Road, it wasn't just a single road, but a web of trade routes covering around 500 kilometers, connecting the east to the west. Bukhara, Avicenna's hometown, sat right on these bustling paths, a vibrant nexus of commerce and culture. But back to our boy Avicenna. His father, Abdullah, was a respected scholar and official, which meant that young Avicenna had access to one of the best libraries in the region. Picture this. While the rest of us were playing tag, or whatever kids did in the year 990, Avicenna was nose-deep in Aristotle's metaphysics. And let's be real, Aristotle's not exactly light reading, but Avicenna breezed through it like it was the latest page-turner. You might be wondering how a teenager gets into Aristotle. Was it peer pressure? A dare? Nope, it was sheer intellectual curiosity. Just imagine him at a teen hangout where instead of gossiping he's like, "Hey, have you guys checked out this new edition of Nicomachean Ethics? It's a real mind-bender." It's safe to say that Avicenna wasn't exactly the life of the party. Unless, of course, it was a philosopher's party, where the debates are fierce and the snacks are probably non-existent. Avicenna's voracious appetite for knowledge didn't stop at Greek philosophy. He was a polymath, dabbling in everything from medicine to astronomy. And guess what? He was a doctor by the age of 18. Yeah, while most of us were worrying about acne and awkward crushes, Avicenna was diagnosing diseases and prescribing treatments. His medical prowess was so renowned that he was summoned to treat the Sultan of Bukhara, now Roman II, when the royal physicians were stumped. And just like that, he was in the imperial inner circle, all because he made the right diagnosis. Talk about networking. This intellectual atmosphere, fueled by the Abbasid Caliphate's patronage of scholars and the trade riches from the Silk Road, made it possible for Avicenna to emerge as a giant in the world of medicine and philosophy. The Islamic Golden Age was a time when knowledge was the currency of power, and Avicenna was its wealthiest citizen. But let's not get too starry-eyed. For every patron ready to throw gold at scholars, there were also political intrigues and rivalries. The Caliphate wasn't all wisdom and enlightenment. It was also a hotbed of conspiracies and power struggles. Scholars, despite their esteemed status, had to navigate this treacherous landscape, balancing their intellectual pursuits with the shifting sands of political favor. In the midst of all this, Avicenna stood out not just for his intellect, but for his audacity. He wasn't content with just absorbing knowledge. He challenged it, questioned it, and expanded upon it. His rebellious teenage years spent mastering the Greek canon were just the beginning of a lifetime spent pushing the boundaries of what was known. And while his contemporaries might have thought him a bit of a know-it-all, he was really just ahead of his time, paving the way for future generations of thinkers. So here's to Avicenna, the teenage rebel with a cause, whose thirst for knowledge was only matched by his determination to share it with the world. He transformed the intellectual landscape of his time, leaving a legacy that would inspire scholars for centuries to come. And all of this because he dared to ask the big questions and wasn't afraid to find his own answers. And so, while Avicenna spent his adolescent years pondering the mysteries of existence and medicine, he wasn't just amassing knowledge for the sake of it. Oh no, this guy had plans. Enter the canon of medicine, or as I like to call it, the medieval equivalent of a medical blockbuster. This wasn't just a book. It was the asterisk book, dominating medical education for centuries. We're talking about a time when the term bestseller would have involved a monk scribbling away for months to make a single copy. Yet, Avicenna's work managed to spread like wildfire, albeit the kind you start with a couple of flints and a lot of patience. Now, let's dive into the medical world back then, a place where bloodletting was all the rage. Imagine your doctor saying, you have a cold. Let's just drain some of your life force to balance things out. Seems a bit counterproductive, right? But for centuries, this was the go-to cure-all. And then there were leeches, nature's little vampires, used to suck out the bad blood. It's a wonder anyone survived their doctor's visit. Yet, amidst all this, Avicenna was busy writing prescriptions that didn't involve blood loss or slimy creatures. His methods were a breath of fresh air, focusing on empirical observation and logical reasoning. Avicenna didn't just compile existing knowledge, he synthesized it, adding his own observations and treatments. His canon covered everything from anatomy to pharmacology, and even what we'd call psychology today. He was keen on preventative medicine, advocating for a balanced diet, exercise, and mental health. Imagine that, 1,000 years ago, and he already knew the importance of a good salad and a jog. Who would have thought? What truly sets Avicenna apart was his ability to see beyond the accepted norms of his time. He challenged the status quo, which, let's be honest, is never a popular move, but he wasn't in it for the popularity contest. He was all about the pursuit of truth, and that meant questioning everything, even the revered practices of Hippocrates and Galen. While others clung to ancient wisdom like it was gospel, Avicenna sifted through it, keeping what worked and discarding what didn't. Now, you might be wondering, how did a book written in the 11th century manage to influence medical thought well into the 17th? The answer: hand copying, the painstaking medieval way of going viral. Scribes would laboriously reproduce texts, and each copy of the canon was a prized possession. We're talking about a manuscript that could cost as much as a small herd of sheep or a modest house. Owning a copy was a status symbol, it said. I'm learned, I'm sophisticated, and yes, I have money to burn on books. The spread of Avicenna's work wasn't just about patient scribes and deep-pocketed patrons, though. It was also about timing. The Islamic Golden Age had created a culture that valued knowledge, and the canon found its way into Europe during the Renaissance, that great awakening of arts and sciences. If you were a medic in medieval Paris, Padua, or Oxford, Avicenna was your go-to guy. His influence was so profound that even after the world moved on to printed texts, his ideas still held sway. The canon was printed in Latin as late as 1593. That's right, over 500 years later, and it was still in demand. Talk about enduring appeal. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The dissemination of his work was not without its hurdles. Political upheavals, plagues, and the ever-fickle nature of human interests meant that his teachings often had to compete with the latest intellectual fashions. Yet, through it all, Avicenna's ideas persisted, a testament to their robustness and relevance. So, here we have Avicenna, not just a teenage prodigy, but a monumental force in medicine, whose work transcended borders and centuries. He was a man who saw the absurdities of his time, questioned them, and dared to offer a different path. And while the world was busy leeching itself pale, Avicenna was there, advocating for a little bit of logic and reason in a world that desperately needed it. As we wrap this part of the story, let's leave Avicenna with his quill in hand, a man ahead of his time, scribbling thoughts that would outlast empires. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about this fascinating figure whose legacy was as much about challenging accepted truths as it was about preserving them. So, as Avicenna scribbles away on his parchment, churning out thoughts that would echo through the ages, let's pivot to the Book of Healing. And no, it's not some medieval self-help guide to a better you, though it probably wouldn't hurt. This is Avicenna's magnum opus, a philosophical treatise that has less to do with bandages and more with the mind's complex machinery. Avicenna's The Book of Healing is an intellectual buffet covering logic, natural sciences, mathematics, and metaphysics. It's like a philosophical Swiss Army knife, designed to tackle every existential crisis you never knew you had. Written between 1020 and 1037 AD, this work was Avicenna's attempt to reconcile the philosophical teachings of the Greeks with Islamic theology, a task that was about as easy as snowballing in hell. His philosophical musings were steeped in Aristotelian thought, but with a twist of Persian spice. He dared to explore concepts like the nature of the soul, the existence of God, and the structure of the universe, all while sitting precariously on the fence between reason and revelation. Now, here's where things get juicy. Avicenna wasn't just content with rehashing Aristotle, he was remixing him like a medieval DJ, adding his own beats to the track. This didn't sit well with everyone. You see, the purists of his time, both religious and philosophical, weren't exactly his biggest fans. To them, Avicenna was the guy who showed up to the philosophical potluck with a dish no one knew how to pronounce, let alone digest. Take, for instance, his concept of the active intellect, an idea that suggested a sort of intermediary intelligence between humans and the divine. For the religious purists, this was like saying there's a middle manager between you and God. Blasphemous, to say the least. And for the philosophical sticklers, who revered Aristotle as the end-all be-all, Avicenna's deviations were nothing short of heretical. Imagine being at a fan club meeting and suggesting the band's latest album could use a bit more cowbell. Yeah, it was kind of like that. But let's not pretend Avicenna was the only one stirring the pot. The political backdrop of his time was a swirling storm of intrigue and empire jockeying. The Persian and Islamic empires were like two heavyweight contenders, each trying to land the knockout punch on the intellectual scene. On one side, you had the Persian Umayyad Dynasty, under which Avicenna served as an occasional political advisor. Yep, our man was moonlighting in politics, because why not add a little more chaos to the mix? The Umayyads were a Persian dynasty that for a time had a stranglehold over the caliphate in Baghdad, which was more symbolic than sovereign at this point. Picture this. The caliphate was like the Queen of England, all pomp and no real power, while the Umayyads were pulling the strings behind the curtain. Avicenna, ever the opportunist, navigated these murky waters, offering counsel to the likes of Shams al-Dawla, the Umayyad ruler of Hamadan. If you're thinking this was a smooth operation, think again. The political landscape was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Avicenna's role as advisor was as much about survival as it was about influence. One minute you're the Sultan's right-hand man, the next you're dodging the proverbial guillotine. His philosophical insights might have been groundbreaking, but in the political arena, they were more like landmines. And so, between writing philosophical treatises, practicing medicine, and dodging political pitfalls, Avicenna was a veritable Renaissance man in a pre-Renaissance world. He was the intellectual equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, always ready with a sharp observation or a cutting retort. But let's not sugarcoat it. His life was a high-wire act without a safety net. He was forever balancing the pursuit of knowledge with the harsh realities of his era. It's this multifaceted life that makes Avicenna such a compelling figure. He was a man who dared to question the status quo, even when it meant ruffling feathers in both religious and philosophical circles. His Book of Healing wasn't just a philosophical treatise. It was a gauntlet thrown down in the face of orthodoxy. And while his contemporaries might have been scandalized, future generations would come to see him as a pioneer, a bridge between the ancient and the modern worlds. As we wrap this part of the tale, let's leave Avicenna amidst his scrolls and political maneuverings, a man whose life was as complex and multifaceted as his work. His story is far from over, and as we delve deeper into the intricacies of his philosophical contributions, we'll uncover even more about this enigmatic figure who dared to defy convention and shape the intellectual landscape for centuries to come. Stay tuned, because Avicenna's philosophical journey is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Avicenna's philosophical journey, though rooted in the dusty libraries of the Islamic Golden Age, was anything but static. Picture his legacy, not as a relic gathering dust, but as an intellectual time capsule that Renaissance Europe eagerly cracked open. By the time Europe pulled itself out of the medieval muck and started embracing the light of the Renaissance, Avicenna's works were like the intellectual equivalent of a gold rush. But don't go imagining him as some lone genius working in the dark, like a medieval Batman. The truth is, Avicenna was part of a vibrant intellectual crowd, and it's high time we meet some of his contemporaries, those unsung heroes who were also rocking the intellectual boat. First up, we have Al-Biruni. If Avicenna was the rock star, Al-Biruni was the bandmate who quietly stole the show. Born in 973 AD, just a few years before Avicenna, Al-Biruni was all about that scientific rigor. He was the kind of guy who didn't just talk about planets. He measured their orbits with uncanny precision. His work on astronomy and geography was so ahead of its time, it was like finding a smartphone in a Flintstones episode. And let's not forget his groundbreaking work on the concept of zero, which would later become the cornerstone of modern mathematics. Without Al-Biruni's calculations, Avicenna's philosophical musings might have been like a house of cards, impressive, but lacking a solid foundation. Then there's Al-Khwarizmi, the man who basically invented algebra. Born around 780 AD, he laid the groundwork for mathematical thought that would change the world. And while Avicenna was busy philosophizing, Al-Khwarizmi was calculating, ensuring that numbers would speak just as loudly as words. His influence was so profound that the word algorithm comes from a Latin translation of his name. That's right, every time you Google something, you're giving a nod to this 9th century whiz. These contemporaries weren't just footnotes in Avicenna's biography, they were crucial chapters in the larger story of scientific and philosophical evolution. But let's be real, history has a way of playing favorites, and Avicenna's name is the one that echoes through the ages. Yet, this myth of the solitary genius doesn't hold water when you dig a little deeper. Renaissance thinkers didn't just stumble upon Avicenna's works in a dusty attic. They were part of a broader intellectual heritage that flowed from the Islamic world into Europe like a tidal wave of enlightenment. Scholars like Roger Bacon and Thomas Aquinas were practically fanboying over Avicenna's synthesis of Greek and Islamic thought. But here's the irony. While Europe was busy idolizing Avicenna, the Islamic world was moving on to new intellectual pastures, leaving behind the very ideas that were setting Europe ablaze. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and Avicenna's intellectual offspring was still sparking debates in European salons. While the Age of Reason was all about empirical evidence and scientific method, Avicenna's blend of reason and revelation was still a hot topic. Philosophers like René Descartes and Baruch Spinoza were grappling with questions Avicenna had posed centuries earlier. Descartes' famous cogito, ergo sum, could have been inspired by Avicenna's exploration of consciousness, a concept he dissected with the precision of a surgeon. But let's not kid ourselves. Not everyone was throwing rose petals at Avicenna's feet. As the Enlightenment progressed, his metaphysical musings were critiqued, dissected, and sometimes outright dismissed. The rise of empiricism meant that some of Avicenna's more abstract ideas didn't quite fit the new scientific narrative. Yet, his work remained a crucial stepping stone, a bridge between ancient philosophy and modern science. You could say he was the philosophical equivalent of a gateway drug, leading budding thinkers from the comforts of metaphysical musings to the addictive rigor of empirical science. And here's where the plot thickens with a taste of irony. Western scientific thought, which prides itself on its secular, empirical roots, owes a debt to the medieval Islamic world, a world where science and faith were two sides of the same coin. Avicenna and his contemporaries were living proof that you could question the heavens while keeping one foot on the ground. Their work was a testament to the power of synthesis, merging the best of Greek, Persian, and Islamic wisdom into a cohesive whole. This was a time when a scientific treatise might sit comfortably alongside a religious text, each offering its own path to truth. So, as we delve deeper into Avicenna's enduring legacy, let's not forget the broader tapestry of history. His story isn't just one of solitary genius, but of a rich, interconnected web of thinkers who dared to dream beyond the confines of their world. Avicenna was a pioneer, sure, but he was also standing on the shoulders of giants, as well as those standing beside him, their collective wisdom lighting the way for future generations. As we leave this chapter hanging in the balance, consider how Avicenna's ideas, once the cutting edge of medieval thought, became the bedrock of Western science and philosophy. His legacy is a reminder that the boundaries between cultures and epochs are often more porous than they appear, and that the quest for knowledge is a universal endeavor. Stay tuned, because there's still more to uncover about this fascinating figure, whose journey through time and thought continues to inspire and challenge us today. Avicenna's journey through time and thought is like a well-aged wine, complex, multifaceted, and with a hint of something unexpectedly profound. It's a story that doesn't just sit quietly in the annals of history. It leaps out at us, challenging our perceptions of both the past and present. But before we get swept away by the romanticism of a medieval genius, let's take a hard look at the man behind the legend. To start, Avicenna's life wasn't exactly the kind of tale you'd find in a fairy tale anthology. Forget the image of a solitary sage cloistered in a tower, riding by candlelight. Avicenna's reality was more Game of Thrones than Disney. He was a political chess player, navigating a landscape where a wrong move could cost you more than just your reputation. His tenure as a vizier involved more intrigue than your average Netflix drama, with shifting alliances, betrayals, and the ever-present threat of falling out of favor. In fact, he was imprisoned at least once, thanks to the political machinations that saw him as more of a pawn than a player. And yet, amidst all this chaos, Avicenna managed to produce works that would outlive the petty squabbles of his time. His canon of medicine was an enormous text that took the medical world by storm. It wasn't just a book, it was a health revolution. His 5-volume masterpiece wasn't just collecting dust on a shelf. It was used as a textbook in Europe until the 17th century. That's a good 600 years of influence, longer than some nations have existed. Talk about a bestseller with staying power, the secret sauce to Avicenna's success. It was his ability to mix empirical observation with theoretical analysis like a master chef blending spices. For instance, he advocated for regular exercise and a balanced diet, a radical idea for the time when fresh air was the closest thing to a health trend. But don't be fooled into thinking he was a saint in a lab coat. Avicenna's work was as much about survival as it was about innovation. In a world where a physician's real currency was influence, he used his medical prowess to curry favor with the ruling elite. It's a reminder that sometimes genius isn't just about talent, it's about timing and a bit of political savvy. As for his philosophical exploits, Avicenna wasn't exactly winning popularity contests in his own time. His ideas were so ahead of the curve that they sometimes alienated his peers. He was the kid in class who dared to point out the teacher's mistake, only to be met with a chorus of groans. His notion of the active intellect still managed to ruffle feathers centuries later. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and you'll see philosophers like Descartes grappling with concepts Avicenna had tackled with ease. Yet, for all his influence, Avicenna never saw himself as a revolutionary. He was a bridge, connecting the wisdom of the Greeks with the emerging Islamic thought, and ultimately the Western world's intellectual rebirth. But let's not get too misty-eyed. We can't ignore the gritty realities of medieval scholarship. In Avicenna's time, being a scholar wasn't just a career, it was a perilous vocation. Libraries were precious, guarded like national treasures, and a single manuscript could cost as much as a house. Knowledge was a commodity, and scholars were both revered and reviled. Avicenna had to battle not just for intellectual recognition, but for survival in a world where the political climate could shift more quickly than the desert sands. Despite these challenges, Avicenna's story continues to captivate us today. Maybe it's the allure of a man who seemed to defy the shackles of his era, or perhaps it's the romantic notion of a lone genius lighting the path for future generations. Yet, the truth is more nuanced. Avicenna was a product of his time, shaped by the intellectual currents of the Islamic Golden Age and the political realities of the Persian Empire. His genius was undeniable, but it was also a reflection of a vibrant scholarly community that recognized the power of knowledge as a unifying force. As we peel back the layers of Avicenna's legacy, we see a man who was as much a product of his environment as he was a creator of it. His work in medicine and philosophy wasn't just about preserving ancient wisdom. It was about challenging it, expanding it, and passing it on to those who would carry the torch. It's a testament to the power of curiosity and the unyielding human spirit that refuses to settle for what is already known. In the end, Avicenna's story is a compelling mix of romance and reality, like a medieval fan fiction that refuses to fade. He reminds us of the enduring power of the written word, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, and the idea that true genius often lies in the ability to see beyond the horizon. As we close the book on Avicenna, we do so not with a finality, but with an understanding that his legacy is a living, breathing testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and culture. So here's to Avicenna, the man who dared to dream in an age of darkness, whose legacy still echoes through the corridors of time. His journey was one of intellectual courage, a defiance of convention, and an unwavering belief in the power of knowledge to illuminate even the darkest corners of human existence. And as we turn our gaze to the future, may we carry forward his spirit of inquiry, always questioning, always learning, and forever pushing the boundaries of what we know. Catherine de' Medici entered the world on April 13, 1519, in Florence, a city where political intrigue was as common as its fine art. Picture a place where every fresco and statue seemed to whisper secrets about power plays and alliances. Born into the Medici family, she was practically cradled in a gold-embroidered political legacy. This wasn't just any family. The Medicis were the Renaissance equivalent of a modern-day celebrity dynasty, with a reputation for banking, patronage of the arts, and of course, a healthy dose of political maneuvering. If you think the Kardashians have influence, you're not even close. Now, Catherine wasn't just any Medici. She was the daughter of Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, a French noble. Unfortunately, both her parents died within weeks of her birth, making her an instant orphan, and as you might say in today's terms, a hot commodity on the political marriage market. Because in the 16th century, being a Medici orphan wasn't so much a tragedy as it was an opportunity for everyone else. Florence, at the time of Catherine's birth, was a hotbed of political chaos, and not exactly the place for a peaceful upbringing. She was shuffled around more than a deck of cards in a Vegas casino, spending her early years under the guardianship of various relatives, and even being held hostage during the anti-Medici uprisings. Yeah, that's right. While most of us were learning our ABCs, Catherine was learning the ABCs of surviving family feuds and political insurrections. Talk about an early education in realpolitik. Despite the turbulence, Catherine's Medici blood was her golden ticket. By the time she was a teenager, her future was being plotted out by none other than her uncle, Pope Clement Roman VII. See, back then, popes didn't just deal with spiritual matters, they were power brokers. And what's a better way to secure a political alliance than through marriage? Enter Henry, Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I of France. Now, Catherine wasn't exactly Henry's first pick. She wasn't even his second. But with a dowry of 100,000 gold crowns, a sum so large it could make a dragon's hoard look like pocket change, she became a very attractive option for the French crown, despite a lack of royal lineage. The year was 1533, and Catherine was just 14 years old when she married Henry. It's worth noting that 100,000 gold crowns was a staggering amount of money, especially when you consider that a skilled craftsman at the time might earn 100 crowns in a year. This wasn't just a dowry, it was a financial power move, a golden handshake that said, "Welcome to the family, now let's talk politics." And boy, did Catherine talk politics, but more on that later. Their marriage wasn't exactly a fairy tale, at least not initially. Henry had his eyes on another lady, Diane de Poitiers, who was decades older and by all accounts quite the charmer. Catherine, on the other hand, was described as plain and was often overlooked. But if history teaches us anything, it's that being underestimated can be a powerful advantage. While Henry played knight to Diane's damsel, Catherine was busy observing, learning, and preparing for the day she'd need to wield her family's legacy like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Catherine's early life was a master class in survival and adaptability. From a turbulent childhood to an arranged marriage that was more business transaction than romance, she was learning the ropes of power in a world where women were often sidelined. But Catherine wasn't just any woman. She was a Medici, and that meant she was born to play the long game. Her story, as we'll see, is one of transformation, from an overlooked foreign bride to one of the most powerful figures in French history. But for now, let's leave young Catherine at the threshold of her new life in France, dowry in tow, poised to make her mark on a world that had no idea what was coming. As the new Duchess of Orleans, Catherine de' Medici stepped into the opulent and treacherous world of the French court, a place where alliances shifted faster than the fashion trends. Picture the Louvre, not yet the art museum we know today, a sprawling palace buzzing with courtiers who were more concerned with their next political move than the next artistic masterpiece. Catherine's new life wasn't just about fancy gowns and lavish banquets. It was a chessboard, and every smile and nod was a strategic move, often with lethal stakes. Let's talk about Henry Roman II, Catherine's husband, who became King of France in 1547. His reign was a whirlwind of war and courtly distractions, with Catherine often cast in the background while Henry played at knighthood. His heart belonged to Diane de Poitiers, a woman who was not only his mistress, but also an influential political advisor. Talk about multitasking. Diane was a formidable presence. She managed to keep Henry's affections despite being old enough to be his mother. Meanwhile, Catherine, ever the pragmatist, bided her time, weaving herself into the intricate tapestry of court politics. Now, Catherine's initial role at court was about as glamorous as being a backstage hand at a rock concert. But she wasn't content with being a historical footnote. Her Medici instincts kicked in, and she started building her own power base. While Henry was off jousting and wooing Diane, Catherine was networking, making key alliances with influential figures, and quietly observing the power dynamics at play. She was like the ultimate backstage pass holder, gaining insider knowledge that would let her prove invaluable. One of Catherine's strategic moves was the assembly of her so-called flying squadron, a group of women who were more than just pretty faces. These ladies were the 16th century version of intelligence agents, tasked with gathering information and influencing the men of the court. Picture a team of Renaissance-era Charlie's Angels, but with corsets and cunning instead of gadgets and martial arts. The flying squadron wasn't just about espionage. It was about creating a network of influence, a web of relationships that Catherine could tug at to shape the political landscape. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Catherine's reputation for poison. Was she really the wicked witch of the Loire Valley, concocting deadly elixirs in her spare time? While tales of Catherine's poisonings make for thrilling stories, the reality is a bit less sinister, though no less fascinating. In an age where assassination was practically a sport, poison was indeed a tool of the trade. But Catherine's real power lay in her ability to manipulate the court's environment, not its wine goblets. Instead of relying solely on poison, she leveraged information and alliances, the real currency of power in her world. Catherine's rise to power wasn't without challenges. The French court was a volatile place, and she had to navigate a minefield of rivalries and betrayals. She was a foreigner in a land where being an outsider was often a liability. Yet, she managed to turn this perceived weakness into a strength. Her Italian roots and Medici lineage gave her a unique perspective and a network that extended beyond the French borders. While Henry was content with his chivalric fantasies, Catherine was busy building an empire, one alliance at a time. When Henry died, in 1559, Catherine found herself in a position she'd been quietly preparing for, regent for her young son, King Francis Roman II. Her moment had finally arrived, and she seized it with the determination of someone who had waited decades for this chance. Her husband's death was not just a personal loss, it was a political opportunity. Catherine stepped into the spotlight, and the French court, once a stage where she played a supporting role, became her theater. As regent, Catherine's influence grew exponentially. She was no longer the overlooked duchess, but the power behind the throne, orchestrating the affairs of state with a deft hand. Her flying squadron was more active than ever, their whispers and winks shaping decisions that would ripple through history. Catherine's Medici upbringing, with its lessons in diplomacy and intrigue, had prepared her well for this role. She was a master of the long game, a strategist who understood that power wasn't just about titles and crowns, but about control and influence. In the tumultuous years that followed, as religious conflicts and political rivalries threatened to tear France apart, Catherine's leadership was both revered and reviled. She was a queen consort turned regent who navigated the stormy seas of French politics with the skill of a seasoned sailor. Her reputation as a poisoner and plotter was both a myth and a reflection of her times, a period where survival often required a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. Catherine de Medici's story is one of transformation and tenacity. From an underestimated duchess to a formidable queen mother, her journey was marked by strategic brilliance and an unyielding will to survive and thrive in a world that was as beautiful as it was brutal. Her legend continues to captivate, a testament to the enduring allure of a woman who mastered the art of power in an era that was anything but forgiving. But don't think this is the end of her tale. There's much more to explore as Catherine's legacy unfolds in the chapters of history yet to be told. Catherine de' Medici's influence was like a fine wine that had finally come of age, just in time for the storm that was brewing in France, with her husband Henry Roman II now a footnote in history, and her son Francis Roman II on the throne. Catherine was the ultimate political puppeteer, pulling strings from behind the Regency curtain. But let's not sugarcoat it. France was a royal mess. The French wars of religion were about to kick off, and let's just say it wasn't exactly a time of peace, love, and understanding. Picture this. France in the 1560. It's like a Game of Thrones episode, but with more religion and fewer dragons. The country was split between Catholics and Huguenots, French Protestants, and the tension was thicker than a medieval stew. Catherine, caught between these warring factions, had to navigate a political landscape that was more a minefield than a chessboard. And remember, this was an era when religion wasn't just a personal belief. It was a political weapon, a badge of identity, and sometimes a death sentence. Enter the Edict of January in 1562, Catherine's attempt at playing peacemaker. Imagine trying to calm a raging sea with a teaspoon. This edict granted Huguenots the right to worship publicly outside town walls and privately inside them. It was like handing out umbrellas in a hurricane, noble, but not enough to stop the storm. The edict was supposed to be a bridge over troubled waters, but it ended up being more of a rickety footbridge over a chasm. The Catholics were incensed, and the Huguenots skeptical. In March of the same year, the massacre at Vassy happened, where dozens of Huguenots were killed by the Duke of Guise's men, igniting the first of many religious wars. Let's just say, Catherine's peace attempt went up in flames faster than a kindling in a barn fire. Catherine, ever the pragmatist, realized that balancing power was like juggling flaming torches. Drop one, and you risk setting the whole circus ablaze. Her sons, Francis Roman II, Charles Roman IX, and later Henry Roman III, were her puppets, yet they were often overshadowed by the warring factions that surrounded them. Each son was like a piece on a chessboard, and Catherine had to protect them from the bishops, dukes, and other power players who were eager to turn them into pawns in their religious games. The apex of this chaos was the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. It was supposed to be a wedding celebration, a union between the Protestant Henry of Navarre and Margaret of Valois, Catherine's daughter, which was meant to reconcile Catholics and Huguenots. Picture a royal wedding, but instead of idas, there were cries of murder. The massacre began on August 24 and lasted several days, with thousands of Huguenots killed in Paris and beyond. It's the kind of event that makes the Red Wedding look like a tea party. Was Catherine responsible for this bloodbath? Some say she was the mastermind, the Lady Macbeth of France, whispering deadly secrets into her son's ear. Others argue she was caught in a tidal wave of violence she couldn't control. Historical records are as tangled as a ball of yarn after a cat's had its way with it. Did she give the order, or was she merely trying to contain the chaos? It's a question that has kept historians debating like caffeinated philosophers at a midnight symposium. The massacre turned Catherine into a symbol of Machiavellian cunning, a woman whose ambition supposedly knew no moral bounds. But let's not forget, she was operating in a world where ruling was a contact sport, and everyone played dirty. Her actions were a desperate attempt to maintain a brittle peace in a country tearing itself apart. In the end, she was vilified as much for her failures as she was for her attempts to hold the kingdom together. Catherine's story during these tumultuous years is a testament to the harsh reality of leadership in a fractured nation. It wasn't just about making the right moves, but about survival in a game with no clear rules. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of ambition, survival, and a relentless pursuit of power. She was a woman who understood that sometimes even the best-laid plans go awry. As the curtain falls on this act of Catherine's life, the story is far from over. She would continue to be a pivotal player in the French court, a mother fighting to secure her children's thrones amidst the chaos. Her life was a dance on the edge of a knife, a balancing act that required nerves of steel and a heart tempered by loss and ambition. The legend of Catherine de' Medici is a tale of power and poison, of a woman who, for better or worse, shaped the course of French history. Stay tuned, because the final chapters of her life are still to come. filled with intrigue, ambition, and a legacy as complex as the woman herself. As Catherine de' Medici maneuvered through the chaos of religious wars and royal wedding-stern massacres, her later years were anything but a graceful fade into the background. Instead, she remained the matriarch of a family that seemed to specialize in drama and dysfunction. If you thought your family gatherings were a challenge, imagine juggling the ambitions, alliances, and frequent betrayals of a royal brood who could weaponize a dinner fork with a glance. Catherine was like the ultimate chess player, but instead of pawns and knights, she had sons and daughters, each with their own set of challenges. Charles Roman IX, her second son, was king but not exactly the monarch of your dreams. He was volatile, prone to fits of rage, and potentially dangerous, like a teenager with a kingdom instead of a skateboard. Catherine, ever the mastermind, was the stabilizing force behind the throne, a role she played with a mix of maternal instinct and Machiavellian flair. Enter Henry Roman III, another son who eventually took the throne, an eccentric king with a penchant for cross-dressing and extravagant balls. He wasn't just ruling France. He was adding his own flair to the royal repertoire, much to the dismay of traditionalists. Catherine had her work cut out for her, maintaining the delicate balance between supporting her son's unique style and keeping the kingdom from descending into chaos. Talk about a royal juggling act. Now, let's not forget Catherine's contributions to Renaissance culture. Oh sure, she was known as the Black Queen, a title that evokes more shadows than light. But this narrative, as darkly alluring as it is, doesn't do justice to her role as a patron of the arts. Catherine had an eye for beauty and an appreciation for the cultural renaissance sweeping through Europe. She wasn't just orchestrating political alliances. She was commissioning tapestries, nurturing the arts, and even introducing the fork to France. Imagine that, a simple piece of cutlery signifying the shift from medieval manners to more refined dining. Forget the guillotine. Catherine's real weapon was cutlery sophistication. Speaking of grand projects, let's talk about the Tuileries Palace. Built on the banks of the Seine, this was Catherine's ambitious architectural endeavor, a symbol of her vision and power. Constructed in 1564, the Tuileries was more than just a palace. It was a statement, a grand gesture that declared, the Medici touch is alive and well. The project's cost was astronomical, akin to building a modern-day skyscraper without the benefit of cranes or hard hats. It was an economic boon and a political statement wrapped in limestone and adorned with the finest Renaissance art. Now, the myth of Catherine as a poisoner persists, and while it adds a certain dramatic flair to her story, the reality is far more nuanced. Was she mixing potions in a secret chamber? Unlikely. The Black Queen moniker was more about perception than potion-making. She was a woman in power at a time when that was about as welcome as a thunderstorm at a picnic. The stories of her dabbling in poison were likely exaggerated, fueled by the fears and fantasies of those who couldn't fathom a woman wielding real power. After all, blaming a woman for wielding influence was a classic move in the medieval playbook, as timeless as blaming the dog for eating your homework. Catherine's real legacy was her political acumen and her uncanny ability to navigate the treacherous waters of a divided France. She was, in many ways, the glue that held the kingdom together, even if that glue sometimes felt more like duct tape hastily applied. Her children, flawed and fractious, were her life's work, and she was determined to secure their futures amidst a backdrop of chaos and conflict. But let's not sugarcoat it. Catherine's reign wasn't all palaces and patronage. Her later years were marked by relentless efforts to maintain control over a kingdom that seemed determined to unravel. Her strategies were as pragmatic as they were ruthless, mixing diplomacy with a dose of realpolitik that would make even the hardiest politician blink. Catherine de' Medici's story is a testament to the complexities of power, a reminder that history is rarely black and white. She was a woman who understood the Game of Thrones long before it became a TV sensation. Her life was a tapestry woven with ambition, culture, and a touch of scandal, a narrative that continues to captivate because it resonates with the timeless human drama of power, legacy, and survival. As the sun set on her life, Catherine had left an indelible mark on France, a country that would continue to feel her influence long after she was gone. Her legacy is a blend of triumph and tragedy, a story that refuses to be pigeonholed into simple categories. Whether seen as a cunning manipulator or a devoted mother, Catherine's life was a testament to the enduring allure and complexity of power. Yet, the tale of Catherine de Medici is far from over. As we continue to explore her final years, the narrative unfolds with even more intrigue, drama, and the relentless pursuit of power that defines her enduring legacy. Stay tuned, because the final chapters promise to be as riveting as the pages that came before. Catherine de Medici's story, much like a Renaissance tapestry, was rich with drama, intrigue, and a few tangled threads. By the time she passed away on January 5, 1589, at the age of 69, she had left an indelible mark on France, a nation that mirrored her own complexities and contradictions. Her death, a peaceful affair by historical standards, was a quiet departure from a life defined by anything but tranquility. She spent her final days at Chateau de Blois, surrounded by a dynasty that seemed to specialize in elaborate dysfunction and political melodrama. Her passing marked the end of an era, but France was hardly ready to close the book on the Medici legacy. If anything, Catherine's death intensified the chaos that had simmered under her watchful eye. The country she left behind was still knee-deep in the French wars of religion, a conflict that had become an unfortunate family tradition. Her son Henry Roman III, the last of her boys to wear the crown, was assassinated later that same year, leaving the French throne in a game of musical chairs that even Catherine's strategic mind would have struggled to navigate. Catherine's deathbed, however, wasn't just a site of familial mourning, but a pivot point for a kingdom grappling with her absence. Her influence had been the glue, however brittle, that held France's fractured political landscape together. With her gone, it was as if the kingdom collectively glanced around, realizing the only adult in the room had left the building. Her departure opened the floodgates to renewed power struggles, as various factions vied for control in a court suddenly bereft of its master puppeteer. The power vacuum was palpable, like the eerie silence after a thunderstorm, where you can almost feel the static in the air. Now, let's talk legacy. A word as overused in politics as diet is in January. Catherine's influence didn't vanish with her last breath. Instead, it morphed and evolved, casting a long shadow over history that was both revered and reviled. Her life became a canvas for storytellers and historians, each painting her with their own brushstrokes. In literature, she was often the villainess, a Machiavellian puppet master pulling strings with fingers stained in metaphorical ink and alleged poison. From Alexander Dumas' novels to Hollywood's silver screen, Catherine was the embodiment of the Dark Queen trope, a role that history's narrative often gifts to powerful women. It's the kind of typecasting that could make any PR agent wince. But was she truly the scheming sorceress of law, or was she simply a woman playing a man's game with the cards she'd been dealt? To unravel this, we must peer beyond the romanticized fog of daggers and poison. Catherine's real legacy is one of survival in a world where ruling was a blood sport. She operated in a male-dominated domain, where every move was scrutinized and every decision dissected by those who held the keys to power. Her role as a mother was inextricably linked to her political maneuvers. She wasn't just raising children. She was nurturing future kings in a climate where crowns came with expiration dates. Catherine's balancing act between power player and matriarch is a testament to her resilience and cunning. She was acutely aware that her children were both her greatest assets and liabilities. Like a chess grandmaster, she moved them across the board with precision, each son a king in his own right, but never quite autonomous. Her daughters were no less crucial, used as pawns in the dynastic games of marriage and alliance. It was a dance of diplomacy and duty, where love and power often intertwined like vines around a trellis. Fast forward to the modern era, and Catherine's narrative remains a subject of fascination and debate. Historians continue to sift through the records, separating fact from fiction in a quest to understand her true impact. She was a woman who wielded influence in an age when female power was often wielded from behind the throne rather than upon it. Her story challenges the simplistic dichotomy of heroine or villainess, offering instead a portrait of a woman who understood the intricacies of power better than most. In contemporary pop culture, Catherine's legend has been revitalized, her story appearing in everything from historical dramas to speculative fiction. She's been portrayed as the ultimate queen bee, a figure whose life is ripe for examination in a world still grappling with gender politics and power dynamics. The fascination with Catherine de' Medici lies not just in her actions, but in her ability to navigate a patriarchal society with a mix of ruthlessness and maternal dedication. Her life is a reminder that history's female power players often walk a tightrope, balancing ambition with societal expectations in a way that men rarely have to. As we wrap up this exploration of Catherine's life, we're left with a tapestry as rich and complex as the woman herself. Her legacy is a testament to the multifaceted nature of power, a reflection of both the light and dark shades of leadership. She was a survivor in a world that demanded resilience and a strategist in a game that offered no easy wins. Her story is a reminder that history is as much about the myths we construct as it is about the truths we uncover. In the end, Catherine de' Medici's life was a masterclass in the art of power, a tale of intrigue, ambition, and the enduring legacy of a woman who refused to be a mere footnote in history. In the middle of the Pacific, about 400 miles from the nearest continent, lies a group of islands that were once the center of a thriving Polynesian civilization. Let's go back about 500 years, when fearless navigators, driven by the same spirit that later propelled humans to the moon, set their sails for what we now know as Hawaii. These Polynesian settlers weren't just weekend sailors. They were master wayfinders, navigating by the stars, ocean swells, and bird migration patterns long before GPS made it easy for the rest of us to find our way to the nearest coffee shop. The Polynesians, arriving from the Marquesas Islands, brought with them more than just a pioneering spirit. They carried the seeds of a complex society, complete with a class system, religious practices, and agricultural know-how. Unlike the pop culture portrayal of a laid-back island life, early Hawaiian society was as structured as a Swiss watch. Social stratification was the name of the game, with chiefs, known as ali, sitting pretty at the top, while the commoners, or makeinana, kept things running smoothly below. And if you were part of the Kawa, or the outcast class, life was less paradise and more Hunger Games without the cameras. These early Hawaiians were experts in sustainable living. Their agricultural system, particularly the ahupua system, was a model of efficiency. Each ahupua, a wedge-shaped land division, ran from the mountains to the sea and was designed to be self-sufficient. Picture it like a giant, eco-friendly conveyor belt, crops and taro patches at the top, fish ponds at the bottom, and a thriving community in between. This setup allowed them to maximize resources and minimize conflict over land, something our modern world could take a few notes on. Now, let's talk numbers. By the time Captain James Cook stumbled upon Hawaii in 1778, the islands were home to roughly 300, 000 to 400, 000 people. That's a pretty impressive population for a place that some might describe as a few dots on a map in the middle of nowhere. Cook's arrival marked the beginning of a significant cultural shift. Until then, the Hawaiians had developed their society in splendid isolation, with no knowledge of the outside world except for the occasional canoe from nearby islands. Enter Captain Cook, the British explorer who had a knack for showing up uninvited. His arrival at the island of Kauai was a turning point that would eventually lead to the kingdom's rise and fall. Cook wasn't just any explorer. He was the 18th century equivalent of a rock star, complete with an entourage and a flair for the dramatic. But unlike his predecessors, who had avoided these waters, Cook was determined to map the Pacific with the precision of a Swiss chronograph. To the Hawaiians, Cook and his crew seemed like guards, or at least close relatives. The timing of Cook's arrival, coinciding with a local festival honoring the god Lono, only added to the mystique. Of course, this mix-up could have been avoided if the Hawaiians had been able to swipe left. But the allure of new technology and strange customs was irresistible. Cook's iron ships and firearms made the Hawaiian double-hulled canoes and wooden spears look like relics from a bygone era. However, the honeymoon phase didn't last long. Cook's visits, much like those awkward family reunions, started out as exciting, but quickly became tedious. The initial fascination was replaced by tension, as the Hawaiians realized these visitors weren't exactly the benevolent deities they had hoped for. Cultural misunderstandings, and the introduction of diseases like smallpox and measles, against which Hawaiians had no immunity, began to take their toll. These diseases decimated the population faster than you can say global pandemic, forever altering the island's demographic landscape. Cook's story in Hawaii ended as dramatically as it began. During his third visit in 1779, things turned sour when a skiff was stolen. In a move that would make even the most seasoned diplomat cringe, Cook attempted to kidnap the local chief to force the return of the stolen goods. Let's just say the plan backfired spectacularly. Cook was killed in the ensuing scuffle, proving once again that cultural sensitivity was not his strong suit. Despite the violent end, Cook's voyages opened the floodgates to Western influences. Traders, missionaries, and adventurers followed in his wake, bringing with them new technologies, ideas, and unfortunately more diseases. The impact was seismic. The traditional Hawaiian way of life, rooted in balance with nature and community, began to erode as Western goods and concepts took root. The arrival of Europeans also sparked a power struggle among the island's various chiefdoms. Armed with guns and steel, the Ali saw an opportunity to settle old scores and consolidate power. What followed was a period of intense political maneuvering that would eventually lead to the unification of the islands under King Kamehameha, but that's a tale for another time. So, what can we take away from this chapter of Hawaiian history? The Polynesians were not just sun-soaked beachcombers. They were skilled navigators, farmers, and builders of a rich, complex society. The arrival of Captain Cook and the subsequent influx of Western influences set off a chain reaction that would ultimately reshape the islands forever. But even amidst the upheaval, the spirit of aloha and the resilience of the Hawaiian people endured, laying the groundwork for the kingdom that would rise and ultimately fall in the years to come. And so, the stage was set for a new player in the Hawaiian saga, a man who would be both a symbol of unification and a harbinger of change. Enter Kamehameha, a name that conjures images of both heroic feats and brutal conquest, a figure as polarizing as he is legendary. Known as the Napoleon of the Pacific, Kamehameha wasn't just playing for keeps, he was playing for history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves with romanticized notions of a peaceful, lake-clad gathering. The unification of the Hawaiian Islands was more Game of Thrones than a friendly luau. Think strategic alliances, a few betrayals, and a blood-soaked path to power. By 1810, Kamehameha had managed to unite the islands, but not without leaving a hefty tab of human and economic cost in his wake. Kamehameha was born around 1758 on the Big Island of Hawaii, a time when the islands were less unified paradise and more a collection of warring chiefdoms. His rise to power started with a prophecy, because what's a legendary leader without one? Predicting that a great king would unite the islands. With such a cosmic endorsement, Kamehameha had the makings of a leader right from the start. But let's be real, it wasn't just destiny that handed him the crown. It was a savvy blend of alliances, military might, and a touch of opportunistic flair. One of Kamehameha's smartest moves was securing the support of foreign advisors and acquiring Western weapons. When you've got muskets and cannons versus spears and clubs, the odds tilt in your favor faster than a bar stool in a dive joint. Kamehameha understood early on that the key to power wasn't just brute force, it was technological superiority. He wasn't just any chief with a penchant for war. He was a tactician who knew how to use the tools at his disposal to devastating effect. Now, about those myth-busting facts. The unification wasn't exactly a love-in. The Battle of Mokorohai in 1782 was Kamehameha's first significant military engagement, where he took down his cousin, Kiwalau, to control the island of Hawaii. This victory was the first domino to fall in a series of conquests that would eventually bring the islands under one rule. Following this, the Battle of Kepaniwai in 1790 saw Kamehameha's forces take on Maui. According to some accounts, the river ran red with the blood of fallen warriors, a testament to the brutal reality behind the unification myth. And let's talk economics, because every war chest needs gold, or in this case, sandalwood. Kamehameha funded his campaigns by trading this coveted wood with Western merchants. The high demand for sandalwood in China meant Kamehameha could fill his coffers, fueling his military machine. It wasn't just a war of swords, it was a war of wallets. The sandalwood trade was lucrative, sure, but it also laid the groundwork for the exploitation of Hawaiian resources, a theme that would echo throughout the island's history. Cementing his rule required more than just a series of battles and strategic marriages, though those certainly helped. Kamehameha instituted the law of the splintered paddle, a decree that protected the common people from harm during wartime. This wasn't just policy, it was PR savvy that would make a modern spin doctor proud. By showing mercy, Kamehameha won the hearts of the people he conquered, ensuring that his rule was seen as legitimate and benevolent, at least on the surface. But a kingdom isn't forged in a day, and Kamehameha knew the value of patience. By 1810, he had united all the major Hawaiian islands under his rule, with the final piece falling into place when Kauai and Niihau submitted to his authority without bloodshed. This wasn't just a political achievement, it was a masterstroke of diplomacy, as he allowed the local chiefs to retain some power, ensuring a smoother transition. And what about the myth of the peaceful unification? Well, it's easy to see why that narrative caught on. It's far more palatable to envision a harmonious gathering than to confront the gritty truth of battle-scarred fields and strategic machinations. But Kamehameha's legacy is richer and more complex than a simple tale of peace. It's a story of power, ambition, and the costly price of unification. As we ponder the rise of Kamehameha, let's not forget the realpolitik behind his reign. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a strategist who understood the delicate balance of power and diplomacy. His ability to wield both the sword and the olive branch set him apart and secured his place in history as the man who brought the Hawaiian Islands together, albeit with a few bumps and bruises along the way. So, what's the takeaway from Kamehameha's saga? Power, like history, is rarely clean-cut. It's a tangled web of alliances, betrayals, and the occasional stroke of brilliance. As we continue our journey through the history of Hawaii, the story of Kamehameha reminds us of the complexities behind the myths and the human cost lurking beneath the surface of grand narratives. But don't pack up your hula skirts just yet. There's more intrigue and upheaval to come in the chapters that follow. Kamehameha's reign was a tough act to follow, but his successors had ambitions as grand as the ocean that surrounded them. As the 19th century rolled on, Hawaii was buzzing on the global radar for more than just its palm trees and hula skirts. It was the era of the sandalwood boom, and the islands were making waves in the world economy. Picture this. Sandalwood became the iPhone of its day, highly coveted, expensive, and ultimately a status symbol. Demand for this aromatic wood in China was skyrocketing, and Hawaii was sitting on a veritable treasure trove. The Kamehameha dynasty, with their hands firmly on the helm, decided to cash in. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the economic boom. While the rest of the world saw Hawaii as a tropical paradise, the locals were experiencing a reality more akin to a pressure cooker. The sandalwood trade was lucrative, sure, but it was also exploitative. The ali, or chiefs, leaned heavily on the commoners, who were already carrying the weight of the world, or at least the kingdom, on their shoulders. Imagine being tasked with hauling sandalwood logs from the mountains down to the ships, all while trying to maintain your regular farming duties. The result was a population caught between a rock and a hard place, with the rock being sandalwood, and the hard place, well, life itself. The economic gains from the sandalwood trade did allow Hawaii to modernize at a rapid clip. Western goods started rolling in like a tidal wave. Fabrics, firearms, and whiskey, oh my. But it wasn't all sunshine and coconuts. The influx of foreign merchants brought with it a growing influence that began to wrap its fingers around the island's destiny like a particularly nosy neighbor. The Kingdom of Hawaii, once a bastion of Polynesian independence, was becoming a pawn in a larger geopolitical chess game. The whaling industry followed sandalwood, adding another layer to Hawaii's economic cake. During the mid-1800s, the Pacific Ocean was the Silicon Valley of whaling, lucrative, competitive, and absolutely cutthroat. With oil lamps flickering in homes around the world, whale oil became the fuel that kept the lights on, and Hawaii was right in the middle of this booming trade route. Honolulu and Lahaina transformed into bustling ports, teeming with sailors looking for a good time and a safe harbor. The islands became a hotspot for whalers on shore leave, their pockets full of cash and their heads full of dreams, most of which involved rum and the local hula dancers. Yet, the allure of the whaling industry came with strings attached. As whale blubber became liquid gold, Hawaii saw an influx of Westerners who brought their own customs, beliefs, and most importantly, business interests. The local economy was thriving, but the social fabric was being stretched thinner than a cheap aloha shirt. Missionaries arrived with their Bibles, determined to save the souls of the islanders, whether they needed saving or not. These missionaries, armed with zeal and an alarming disregard for cultural nuance, started to reshape Hawaiian society, one sermon and schoolhouse at a time. It was a classic tale of give and take. The Hawaiian kingdom was modernizing, adopting Western education and legal systems, but losing pieces of its soul in the process. The introduction of a written language was a double-edged sword, preserving Hawaiian history while simultaneously eroding oral traditions. Legal reforms began to mirror Western models, which, while efficient, often clashed with traditional Hawaiian values and practices. Let's not forget the elephant in the room, the growing foreign grip on the island's future. The Hawaiian monarchy, eager to keep pace with the rest of the world, found itself increasingly beholden to Western powers. The British, Americans, and French were circling like sharks, each with an eye on the potential economic and strategic advantages of the islands. Treaties were signed, flags were raised and lowered, and sovereignty became a slippery concept. In 1843, the Kingdom of Hawaii faced a sovereignty crisis that would make any modern-day political thriller look like a Sunday picnic. Enter Lord George Paulet, a British naval officer with a penchant for imperialism. Frustrated by perceived injustices against British subjects, Paulet took control of the islands in what can only be described as an overzealous land grab. For 5 months, the British flag flew over Hawaii until diplomatic pressure from both the Hawaiian monarchy and the British government forced Paulet to hand the islands back. King Kamehameha Roman 3 famous words, Ua Mauki I O Kar Aina Ka Pono, meaning the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness, became a rallying cry for sovereignty, although the incident left a lingering question mark over Hawaii's independence. Meanwhile, the United States was eyeing Hawaii like a kid in a candy store. With its prime location in the Pacific, the islands were a strategic jackpot, halfway to Asia, and a perfect pit stop for American ships. The U.S. began to exert its influence through missionaries turned corporate figures who had their hands in everything from sugar plantations to political reforms. These sugar barons, more interested in profit margins than cultural preservation, began to pull the economic strings, further entwining Hawaii's destiny with foreign interests. By the mid-1800s, the Hawaiian kingdom was caught in a paradox. On one hand, it was a golden age, marked by economic prosperity and technological advancements. On the other, it was a time of cultural erosion and political vulnerability. The alii, navigating these tumultuous waters, found themselves increasingly relying on foreign advisors. The monarchy was modernizing, yes, but at a cost that would soon become all too clear. As we leave this chapter of Hawaiian history, it's crucial to remember the duality of progress, the same forces that propelled Hawaii onto the world stage. Sandalwood, whaling, sugar were also the ones that began to undermine its sovereignty. The Kingdom of Hawaii was a vibrant tapestry of tradition and transformation, a place where ancient Polynesian culture met the relentless tide of Western expansion. And just like any good story, the real intrigue lies in what happens next. Stay tuned, because the plot is about to thicken, and the stakes are set to rise faster than a Honolulu sun. As the 19th century rolled on, Hawaii found itself trapped between its cultural heritage and the relentless tug of Western influence, creating a tension so palpable you could almost pluck it like a ukulele string. The Kingdom of Hawaii was a place where ancient traditions clashed with modern ambitions, and nowhere was this more evident than in the sugar industry, a sweet temptation that came with a bitter aftertaste. Fast forward to the 1880s, and sugar was king. This wasn't your grandma's sugar bowl. It was a full-blown economic powerhouse, accounting for a whopping 75% of Hawaii's exports by 1890. Plantations sprawled across the islands like a patchwork quilt, stitched together by the sweat and toil of immigrant labor. You see, the sugar barons weren't just growing cane. They were cultivating a socio-economic revolution, one that relied heavily on imported workers. Chinese, Japanese, and Portuguese immigrants arrived in droves, lured by the promise of work and the hope of a better life. By 1884, nearly 50,000 laborers had crossed the Pacific to Hawaii, a number that would make any modern HR department break out in hives. But while the sugar barons were counting their profits, the Hawaiian monarchy was feeling the squeeze. Here's the irony. The very industry that was putting Hawaii on the global map was also unraveling its sovereignty thread by thread. The sugar magnates, mostly American and European descendants, wielded enormous influence, and they weren't shy about flexing their economic muscle. With pockets deeper than a lava tube, they began to see the Hawaiian government not as a partner, but as an obstacle, one that needed a bit of remodeling. Enter King Kalakaua, a monarch with a penchant for lavish parties and an ambition to restore Hawaiian pride. Known as the Merry Monarch for his love of music and dance, Kalakaua was attempting to modernize the kingdom while preserving its cultural roots. It was like trying to juggle pineapples and torches. One wrong move, and everything could go up in flames. But for all his charisma, Kalakaua was walking a political tightrope. The king's ambitious public works projects and attempts to promote Hawaiian culture were a double-edged sword, raising national pride while draining the royal coffers. By 1887, the kingdom's debt had ballooned to a staggering $2 million, leaving Kalakaua vulnerable to external pressures. And pressure there was, like a pressure cooker with a faulty valve. The sugar planters, fed up with high tariffs on their goods, were eager for a change that would favor their business interests. They wanted reciprocity with the United States, tax-free sugar exports in exchange for Hawaiian concessions, a deal that would make even the most hardened poker player sweat. But the U.S., smelling opportunity, wanted more than just a sweet deal. They had their eyes on Pearl Harbor, a gem of strategic value. The tension reached a boiling point on June 30, 1887, with the so-called Bayonet Constitution, the political equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover. Picture this: a group of disgruntled sugar barons and their allies, mostly American businessmen and missionaries, banded together like a band of merry pirates, but without the charm. They called themselves the Hawaiian League, a name that sounds far more benign than their intentions. Armed with guns and a laundry list of demands, they confronted King Kalakaua at his Iolani palace, forcing him to sign a new constitution at metaphorical gunpoint. The Bayonet Constitution stripped the monarchy of its power faster than you can say aloha. It transferred authority from the king to a cabinet and a legislature dominated by the planters and their cronies. Voting rights were restricted to property-owning males, disenfranchising native Hawaiians and Asian immigrants. A political coup wrapped in the guise of democracy. It was as if the kingdom had been handed an eviction notice, with the king reduced to little more than a ceremonial figurehead. Yet, as much as the Bayonet Constitution was a power grab, it was also a reflection of the racial and economic tensions bubbling beneath the surface. The sugar barons, predominantly white, viewed the native Hawaiian leadership as inept and incapable of managing the kingdom's affairs. Their attitudes were steeped in the paternalistic racism of the era, where the so-called civilizing mission was often just a cover for economic exploitation. The irony, of course, was that these same businessmen were the ones destabilizing the very kingdom they claimed to save. Meanwhile, the native Hawaiian population, already diminished by disease and economic marginalization, watched as their sovereignty slipped away. The Bayonet Constitution was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark reminder that the kingdom's fate was being decided not in the royal halls, but in the boardrooms of sugar magnates and foreign diplomats. It was a classic case of economic interests trumping political autonomy, a recurring theme in the annals of imperial history. But let's not forget the international stage, where the geopolitical chess game was in full swing. The United States, seeing the strategic value of Hawaii as a mid-Pacific refueling station, was more than happy to support the planters' ambitions. The Reciprocity Treaty of 1875 had already given Americans a foothold in the islands, and the Bayonet Constitution only tightened their grip. It was a win-win for Uncle Sam, who got increased economic access and a potential military outpost without firing a single shot. As for King Kalakaua, the Bayonet Constitution marked the beginning of the end of his reign. Diminished in power and influence, the king became a tragic figure, a monarch in name only. His dream of a Hawaiian renaissance, of a kingdom that could stand proudly on the world stage, was slipping through his fingers like sand on Waikiki Beach. And yet, even in his diminished state, Calicor's legacy would endure, a testament to a kingdom's struggle to maintain its identity amidst the relentless tide of change. So where does this leave us? The Bayonet Constitution wasn't just a legal document. It was a watershed moment that set Hawaii on an irreversible path. The internal struggles of the kingdom, compounded by external pressures, were now playing out in a high-stakes game that would eventually lead to the island's annexation. The sugar barons had won the battle, but the war for Hawaii's soul was far from over. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a tapestry of human ambition, greed, and resilience. The story of Hawaii's Bayonet Constitution is a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked power and the fragility of sovereignty in the face of economic interests. And while the kingdom may have been reduced to a shadow of its former self, the spirit of its people, resilient, proud, and enduring, remains unbroken. As we continue this journey, keep your eyes peeled for the next twist in the tale, because the plot is about to thicken, and the stakes are about to get even higher. Stay tuned for the next installment, where the winds of change blow ever stronger, and the fate of the Hawaiian kingdom hangs in the balance. And so, we find ourselves at the precipice of Hawaii's last royal chapter, a tale that reads like a Shakespearean drama with a dash of geopolitical intrigue. By 1893, the Kingdom of Hawaii was a house of cards, teetering precariously on the edge, thanks to the machinations of sugar barons and the ever-watchful eyes of Uncle Sam. It's the kind of historical moment that makes you want to grab a bag of popcorn, if only it weren't so tragic. Let's set the stage. Queen Liliuokalani, the kingdom's last monarch, ascended the throne in 1891, inheriting a political landscape that looked more like a minefield than a monarchy. Determined to restore power to her people, Liliuokalani proposed a new constitution to replace the shackles of the Bayonet Constitution. But her aspirations for a restored Hawaiian sovereignty were akin to trying to stop a tidal wave with a beach umbrella. The sugar planters, smelling rebellion in the air, went about to let their sweet deal with the U.S. sour. Enter the Committee of Safety, a name that sounds like it belongs to a neighborhood watch group, but was actually a cabal of 13 American and European businessmen and politicians with a shared appetite for power. Their goal: overthrow the monarchy and establish a provisional government, all with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. They had no time for royal niceties, only for business as usual. The coup of January 17, 1893, often painted as a bloodless revolution, was anything but benign. Sure, there were no epic battles or dramatic last stands, but don't let the absence of cannon fire fool you. The U.S. Minister to Hawaii, John L. Stevens, played a crucial role, deploying 162 U.S. Marines and sailors from the USS Boston to protect American lives and property. In reality, they were there to intimidate, their presence a not-so-gentle reminder of who held the real power. It was a classic case of gunboat diplomacy, where the mere threat of violence was enough to achieve political ends. Queen Liliuokalani, faced with overwhelming odds and a desire to prevent bloodshed, made the painful decision to yield her authority, trusting that the U.S. government would right the wrongs inflicted upon her people. Her abdication was not a concession of defeat, but a strategic retreat, a gamble on American principles of justice and democracy. Spoiler alert, the gamble didn't pay off. Her words, "I yield to the superior force of the United States of America," marked not just the end of her reign, but the sunset of a sovereign kingdom. Now, let's talk numbers. The coup was orchestrated by a mere handful of individuals, yet it dismantled a monarchy that had ruled for nearly a century. It's the kind of underdog story that would be inspiring if it weren't so morally bankrupt. The provisional government, led by Sanford B. Dole, yes, of the Pineapple Empire, wasted no time in seeking annexation by the United States. Dole and his cohorts envisioned a future where Hawaii was an American territory, a stepping stone in the Pacific for trade and military might. But here's where the plot thickens. President Grover Cleveland, upon hearing of the coup, was less than amused. Cleveland, a stickler for constitutional integrity, called the overthrow an act of war against a friendly nation. He ordered an investigation led by James Blount, whose report confirmed that the coup was indeed illegal and orchestrated by Americans with financial interests, not the will of the Hawaiian people. Cleveland pushed for the restoration of Queen Liliuokalani, a move that set off a political firestorm in both Washington and Honolulu. Yet, for all his high-minded ideals, Cleveland's efforts were thwarted by political gridlock and the shifting winds of American expansionism. By the time William McKinley took office in 1897, the mood had changed. The Spanish-American War was on the horizon, and Hawaii's strategic location was too tempting for American imperialists to resist. In 1898, the Newlands Resolution officially annexed Hawaii, transforming it from a kingdom into a U.S. territory with the stroke of a pen. It was a bittersweet victory for the annexationists, sweet for their economic prospects, but bitter for the native Hawaiians, who found themselves strangers in their own land. So, how did a kingdom that once commanded the Pacific fall to a small group of insurgents? The answer lies in a tangled web of economic interests, political maneuvering, and imperial ambition. The sugar barons, with their deep pockets and deeper connections, were the puppet masters, pulling strings with precision. The U.S. government, caught between its ideals and its interests, ultimately chose the latter, prioritizing strategic gains over moral responsibility. The legacy of Hawaii's overthrow is as complex as the islands themselves. On one hand, it serves as a cautionary tale about the corrosive power of economic interests and the fragility of sovereignty in the face of imperial ambition. On the other, it's a story of resilience and resistance, of a people who, despite the odds, have never stopped fighting for justice and recognition. In 1993, a century after the coup, the U.S. government issued a formal apology to the Hawaiian people, acknowledging the role of American agents in the illegal overthrow. It was a symbolic gesture, a long overdue acknowledgement of past wrongs, but it did little to change the realities on the ground. Today, the spirit of Aloha endures, a testament to the resilience of a culture that has weathered storms far greater than any hurricane. The story of the Hawaiian kingdom is a reminder that history, like the ocean, is vast and deep, filled with currents that can change direction at any moment. As we close the book on this chapter, remember that the past is never truly past. It echoes in the present, shaping the future in ways we might not yet understand. So, what's the takeaway? History is messy, a kaleidoscope of human ambition, folly, and resilience. The fall of the Hawaiian kingdom is a story of power and politics, of dreams deferred and battles lost. But it's also a story of hope, of a people who continue to fight for their rights and their heritage. As we reflect on this tale, let's remember that history isn't just about what happened. It's about what happens next. And in the case of Hawaii, the next chapter is still being written, one wave at a time. If you want to find the original hipster of antiquity, you need look no further than Marcus Aurelius. Born in 121 AD, Marcus was the kid who wore a toga before it was cool. And by cool, I mean mandatory for the Emperor of Rome. His early life was a curious blend of lavish privilege and philosophical musings, a sort of ancient Roman version of wearing thrift store clothes while sipping artisanal wine from a goblet. Marcus wasn't born into the throne. In fact, he was like the understudy in a Roman drama who never expected the lead role. His family was well connected, though, and you know how that goes. One day you're playing with wooden swords in the garden, and the next, you're being adopted by the Roman emperor himself. Talk about a twist of fate. His adoption by Antoninus Pius in 138 AD was both a blessing and a curse. Marcus was only about 17 at the time, and it was like being handed the keys to a chariot you didn't ask to drive. Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, was a ruler so mild and uneventful that historians had to squint to find anything of interest about his reign. Yet, his decision to adopt Marcus was a game-changer for the Roman Empire. Marcus wasn't Antoninus's biological son, but let's face it, in Roman politics, family ties were more flexible than a Cirque du Soleil performer. Before all this imperial adoption business, young Marcus had already developed an unusual obsession for the times: philosophy. Picture a kid who, instead of collecting marbles or skipping stones, devoured the works of the Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Seneca. He was the kind of teenager who would have rolled his eyes at gladiator games, and preferred a good scroll of philosophy over a day at the circus. This was the Roman Empire, after all, where the line between entertainment and brutality was as thin as a senator's toga. Now, let's debunk a bit of the romantic myth here. Marcus's philosophical bent wasn't just a quaint hobby, it was a necessity. The Roman Empire was a sprawling beast, stretching from modern-day Britain to Egypt, and running it was like trying to organize a never-ending family reunion where nobody speaks the same language. Marcus needed the grounding, the mental fortitude that Stoicism offered. His philosophical journey started early, probably because he was surrounded by tutors who were more like intellectual bodybuilders. You had Herodes Atticus, a Greek orator who was like the Tony Robbins of the ancient world, and Fronto, a rhetorician who could argue circles around anyone. These were the guys whispering in young Marcus's ear, teaching him that wisdom was worth more than gold. Though, to be fair, Marcus probably had plenty of both. And while he might have been the ancient equivalent of a bookworm, Marcus wasn't entirely immune to the usual distractions of youth. There's an amusing anecdote about how he was once persuaded to go hunting with his friends. Marcus, the future emperor and Stoic philosopher, was reportedly so bad at it that he preferred reading to riding. His friends must have thought he was as out of place as a toga in a toga party. When Antoninus Pius adopted Marcus, he also threw in an unexpected bonus. Lucius Verus, another young nobleman, was adopted alongside him. It was like a 2-for-1 deal at the adoption market. Lucius was the yin to Marcus's yang, more interested in parties than philosophy, more likely to be found in the amphitheater than the library. Their partnership would later become one of the most intriguing co-emperorships in history, but that's a story for another day. Marcus's early life is a testament to the strange mix of privilege and pressure that follows those born into power. He was surrounded by wealth and luxury, yet he chose to focus on the philosophical teachings that would prepare him for a life he never really wanted. It's the kind of paradox that could make a Stoic philosopher proud, or at least nod approvingly while sipping wine at an imperial banquet. His path to power was paved with expectations and responsibilities, but it was also illuminated by the guiding light of Stoicism. This philosophy wasn't just an academic pursuit. It was a practical tool that would help him navigate the turbulent waters of Roman politics and personal challenges. Marcus's life was a series of contrasts between the personal and political, the philosophical and pragmatic. He was a reluctant heir, but one who embraced his role with a quiet determination that would define his legacy. So, as we wrap up this first chapter of Marcus Aurelius's life, remember that this philosopher-emperor was more than just a man in a toga. He was a thinker, a leader, and perhaps the world's first philosophical hipster. And as we dive deeper into his life, you'll see how these early experiences shaped a ruler whose wisdom still resonates today, even if his toga-wearing days are long gone. As the toga-wearing days of Marcus Aurelius transitioned from philosophical musings to imperial realities, we find him at the threshold of power in 161 AD. At 40 years old, a ripe age by Roman standards, where life expectancy was often cut short by sword or sickness, Marcus was about to step into the sandals of an emperor. But he wasn't doing it alone. Enter Lucius Verus, his co-emperor, partner in crime, and the Ernie to his bird. If history expected a dramatic duel for dominance, it was sorely disappointed. Instead, it got an unusual duet, more sitcom than saga, as these two navigated the choppy waters of Roman leadership. The Roman Empire wasn't exactly a walk in the gladiator park. Economically, the empire was like a really big, ancient version of a modern multinational corporation with different departments, provinces, that all had their own quirks, challenges, and rebellions. The treasury was perpetually in a state of anxiety, juggling to keep up with the demands of a vast military and the occasional lavish games to keep the populace entertained and distracted. The empire's coffers were about as stretched as a Roman senator's waistband after a particularly indulgent feast. Marcus and Lucius were thrust into the spotlight at a time when the empire's economic health was akin to a patient in need of constant care. Inflation was a nasty beast. The denarius, the silver coin that was the backbone of the Roman economy, was starting to lose its shine, literally and figuratively. But the true test of their co-emperorship came in the form of the Parthian War, a conflict that had about as much subtlety as a Roman chariot race. Now, if there's one thing you should know about the Parthians, It's that they were the formidable eastern neighbors who had a knack for being a thorn in Rome's side. While the Romans were no strangers to warfare, the Parthian War was like a bad sequel to an already poorly reviewed movie. It all kicked off in 161 AD, right when Marcus and Lucius were just getting their imperial feet wet. Lucius was sent east to deal with this sticky situation, a move that seemed more like Marcus saying, "You handle this one. I've got some scrolls to catch up on." Despite his reputation as more of a party animal than a philosopher, Lucius Verus didn't completely botch the job. He brought back some military victories, which, let's be honest, were as much about the competence of the Roman legions as they were about Lucius's leadership. The Roman army, ever the resilient force, managed to push back the Parthian advances and even captured the city of Ctesiphon in 165 AD. It was a military victory that gave Rome a temporary sigh of relief and a bit of bragging rights at the next Senate gathering. But let's not romanticize these military endeavors. The Roman soldiers were harder to impress than a crowd at a stand-up comedy night. For them, the real enemy wasn't just the Parthians, it was boredom. Long stretches of nothingness between battles led to more than a few grumblings in the ranks. Soldiers were known to have a sense of humor as dark as their leather sandals, often jesting that the longer the peace, the longer the list of chores. When they weren't fighting, they were building roads, setting up camps, or engaging in what was probably the ancient equivalent of tedious team-building exercises. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Marcus was holding down the fort, dealing with the day-to-day drudgery of imperial administration. It was a role that suited his temperament, calm, collected, and contemplative. His Stoic philosophy wasn't just a personal hobby, it was a toolkit for governance. Marcus believed in the power of reason and virtue over impulsive decisions, a mindset that was often at odds with the political climate of Rome, where scheming was as common as toga parties. The dynamic between Marcus and Lucius was an oddity in Roman history. Where one might expect rivalry and backstabbing, they instead found a way to make it work, like an ancient version of a buddy cop film, where one cop is by the book and the other is a bit of a maverick. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and an understanding that their differences were their strength. Marcus brought the wisdom and gravitas, while Lucius brought a certain flair and willingness to tackle the more unsavory aspects of leadership, like war. As much as their dual reign was a surprising success, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Parthian War, victorious though it may have been, brought with it a hidden enemy, disease. Troops returning from the east carried with them a plague that would sweep through the empire like a particularly vengeful god. The Antonine Plague, as it would later be known, was a brutal reminder of the interconnected world of Rome, a world where military triumphs could come with deadly side effects. This devastating pandemic, which some historians speculate might have been smallpox or measles, had a death toll that would make any modern health official break into a cold sweat. It ravaged the population, from the bustling streets of Rome to the far-flung reaches of the empire. Marcus, ever the Stoic, faced this crisis with his characteristic resilience, but it was a blow that left scars on the empire and its people. Through all of this, Marcus's philosophical writings began to take shape. His Meditations, series of personal reflections that would outlast the empire itself, were likely penned during these tumultuous times. They capture the essence of a ruler grappling with the enormity of his responsibilities, a man seeking clarity amidst chaos. It's a testament to his enduring legacy that these writings continue to resonate, offering insights into the human condition that are as relevant today as they were 2 millennia ago. In the end, the reign of Marcus and Lucius was a balancing act, a tightrope walk between the demands of the empire and the personal philosophies that guided them. Their partnership, although unconventional, proved that sometimes 2 heads are indeed better than one, even if those heads are wearing laurel wreaths instead of thinking caps. As we leave Marcus and Lucius in this chapter of their story, remember that their legacy was not just in their victories or their governance, but in their ability to navigate the complexities of leadership with a bit of humor, a dash of humility, and a whole lot of Stoic wisdom. As the dust settled from the Parthian War, Marcus Aurelius found himself facing a new kind of adversary. Enter the Antonine Plague, a pandemic so vicious it made Rome's military skirmishes look like schoolyard scuffles, while COVID-19 had a stockpiling hand sanitizer and toilet paper The Antonine Plague gave the Romans something much grimmer to worry about: survival. This wasn't just another Roman malady. It was a full-blown crisis that put the empire's resilience to the ultimate test. Historians estimate that this plague, likely smallpox or measles, struck in 165 AD and lingered like an unwelcome guest at a dinner party, overstaying its welcome for over a decade. It claimed the lives of up to 5 million people, slicing through the Roman population like a scythe through a wheat field. In some areas, mortality rates soared to an alarming 25%, leaving towns and villages ghostly and silent. The impact was felt from the crowded marketplaces of Rome to the distant outposts of Britannia. For Marcus, whose Stoic philosophy was all about accepting what you cannot change, this was the ultimate test of endurance and adaptability. But let's not paint Marcus as an unflappable sage sitting cross-legged while chaos reigned outside. The reality was far grittier. Imagine an emperor who, instead of retreating to a cushy villa, took his philosophical musings to the front lines, literally. Marcus spent much of his reign not in the marble halls of Rome, but in military camps along the Danube, facing both Germanic tribes and the relentless plague. Picture Marcus in a tent, quill in hand, jotting down thoughts that would become the Meditations, his famous collection of personal reflections. Forget luxury retreats. This was Stoic boot camp. The Meditations, penned in Greek despite Marcus's Roman heritage, reveal a man wrestling with doubt and weariness. They are full of reminders to himself about the transient nature of life and the importance of inner virtue over external chaos. One could argue that Marcus was the original self-help guru, dishing out wisdom that would outlast the empire itself. Yet, these writings also expose cracks in his Stoic facade. Here was a man grappling with the weight of leadership and the frailty of human life, as vulnerable as any of us when the world spirals out of control. But let's not romanticize it too much. While Marcus was philosophizing on the move, the Roman economy was taking a nosedive. The Antonine Plague didn't just decimate the population. It wreaked havoc on the labor force, causing a ripple effect of economic woes. Fields went unplowed, businesses shuttered, and the empire's already stretched finances were pushed to the brink. The denarius, the trusty Roman coin, was devalued to prop up the military budget, leaving the treasury as bare as a senator's toga after a toga party. In the midst of this turmoil, Marcus's Stoic calm was more necessity than luxury. It was a tool for survival, a coping mechanism in the face of relentless adversity. Yet, it would be a mistake to picture him as an emotionless statue. Accounts from the time suggest moments of frustration and anger, like when the Germanic tribes, sensing Roman vulnerability, launched raids across the Danube. The stress of constant warfare and the plague's devastation would have tested anyone's resolve, even a philosopher emperor. The myth of Marcus's unwavering calm often overshadows the reality of a man under immense pressure. His decisions weren't always popular or successful. For instance, his attempts to replenish military ranks by conscripting slaves and gladiators were met with resistance, reflecting the desperate measures Rome was forced to adopt. It wasn't just a test of stoicism. It was a trial by fire, with Marcus trying to hold the empire together while the world around him threatened to crumble. As the plague raged on, Roman society adapted in ways that would shape its future. Empire's reliance on military strength and territorial expansion was under scrutiny as resources dwindled and priorities shifted. Public health became a pressing concern in a way that echoed across the centuries to our own pandemic experiences. Marcus's reign was a crucible, forging new paths for governance and resilience that would inform the Roman legacy long after his death. Yet, even as he battled these colossal challenges, Marcus never lost sight of the personal. His meditations are peppered with reflections on friendship, duty, and the importance of living a life aligned with one's principles. They're a window into the mind of a leader who understood that true strength lies not in conquest or wealth, but in the character and wisdom one cultivates. So, as we pause on this chapter of Marcus Aurelius's life, let's remember the reality behind the myth. This was a man who faced the darkness with a lamp of philosophy, illuminating his path and those of countless others. The plague, the wars, and the economic struggles were not just historical footnotes, but the very crucible that shaped his legacy. Marcus's story is one of resilience, not just in the face of external threats, but in the internal battles that defined his reign. As we delve deeper into his journey, remember that the Stoic philosopher was as human as the rest of us, wrestling with the chaos of life while striving to maintain a semblance of order. As the sun set on the Antonine Plague's devastation, Marcus Aurelius found himself entangled in another grim chapter of his reign, the Marcomannic Wars. If you're picturing Marcus as a calm philosopher sipping wine with a quill in hand, think again. This time it was all swords, shields, and a whole lot of chaos. The Marcomanni, along with a motley crew of other Germanic tribes, decided it was the perfect time to crash Rome's already chaotic party. The Danube frontier was less a line in the sand and more like a revolving door for invaders. These wars, kicking off around 166 AD, were a series of run-ins with tribes who had a knack for turning Roman outposts into smoldering ruins. Marcus, who probably would have preferred debating the finer points of Stoicism back in Rome, instead found himself in the trenches. To his credit, he didn't just sit back and philosophize. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, leading campaigns that were less about glory and more about sheer survival. The Marcomannic Wars were like a bad Roman sequel that kept getting extended for more seasons than anyone asked for. These conflicts stretched on for nearly 2 decades, with Marcus often stationed on the front lines. Imagine the emperor not in a cushy palace, but in a drafty military camp, dealing with everything from logistics and strategy to morale and mutiny. The Roman legions, once the pride of the empire, were now a patchwork unit made up of whatever manpower Marcus could muster. Slaves, gladiators, and even criminals found their way into the ranks, a testament to how dire the situation had become. It was like the Roman version of "we'll take anyone willing to hold a sword." While the Roman economy wasn't entirely in tatters, it was limping along like an old centurion with one too many battle scars. The cost of war was astronomical. Funding these campaigns was like trying to keep a fleet of chariots running on a shoestring budget. The treasury was always on the brink, and Marcus had to be as much an economist as an emperor. Inflation was a constant companion, as the denarius continued to suffer from a severe case of shrinkage, both in size and value. Yet, despite the financial strain, Marcus somehow managed to keep the empire from collapsing like a poorly built aqueduct. But let's not get too romantic about Marcus the battlefield philosopher. His leadership, while stoic and competent, wasn't without controversy. It's easy to paint him as the noble philosopher king, but the reality was more complex. His decision-making was occasionally as questionable as his choice in co-emperors. Speaking of which, let's talk about Commodus. Ah yes, Commodus, his son, heir, and future co-emperor. A name that would eventually make many Romans shudder. Marcus's decision to elevate Commodus to the role of co-emperor in 177 AD was about as popular as a toga party without wine. Here was a young man who was less interested in philosophy and governance, and more inclined toward gladiatorial games and lavish spectacles. If Marcus was the philosopher king, Commodus was the emperor who thought he was a gladiator. It wasn't just nepotism. It was a gamble that would have lasting consequences for the empire. Commodus's reign would later be infamous, marked by erratic behavior, indulgence, and a penchant for seeing himself as a living deity. Historians often describe him as a ruler who was more interested in personal glory than the welfare of Rome. The decision to bring him into the fold was one that Marcus might have regretted in the afterlife. But at the time, perhaps Marcus saw it as a way to secure the dynasty, a move to ensure stability in a world that seemed to be unraveling at the seams. Marcus's parenting skills, or lack thereof, were a curious mix of classical education and what could only be described as laissez-faire oversight. He surrounded Commodus with tutors, hoping they'd impart wisdom and virtue, but it seems the young prince was more interested in the Colosseum than the classroom. Maybe Marcus thought he could mold Commodus into a ruler with the same stoic principles he held dear. If so, it was a noble but ultimately flawed endeavor. The transition from Marcus to Commodus marked a significant turning point for Rome. Where Marcus was reflective and deliberate, Commodus was impulsive and decadent. The contrast between father and son was like night and day, or perhaps more accurately, like a toga-clad philosopher and a toga-clad rock star. The myth of the philosopher king was beginning to unravel, revealing the harsh reality that even the most thoughtful and virtuous of rulers could make disastrous personal choices. So, As we leave Marcus in the thick of the Marcomannic Wars and the challenges of empire, let's remember that this was a man who faced the abyss with as much grace as any human could muster. His reign was an epic balancing act, holding the empire together one day at a time, while his personal and political choices set the stage for future chaos. The philosopher-emperor may have penned wisdom for the ages, but his legacy was as human and flawed as the rest of us, defined by both remarkable resilience and the all-too-familiar missteps of fatherhood. And so, the story of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wends its way toward a Sama finale, as his health begins to falter in the closing years of his reign. The year is 180 AD, and Marcus, now in his late 50s, is feeling the weight of his years on both his shoulders and his empire. Back then, life expectancy was more a suggestion than a guarantee, and for a man who'd spent much of his reign in the grueling company of war and plague, reaching his age was an achievement in itself. Yet, the rigors of ruling an empire were less forgiving than a toga party without wine. Marcus's decline in health was as gradual as the fading of Rome's golden age. He'd been camped along the Danube, still grappling with those persistent Germanic tribes, when sickness finally took its toll. It wasn't the noble image of an emperor resting on a marble throne. It was more an exhausted leader hunched over dispatches, trying to hold together an empire fraying at the edges. The man who once juggled philosophy like a master was now struggling to keep his own body in balance. His death came not in the grandeur of Rome, but in the unassuming city of Vindobona, present-day Vienna. The date was March 17, 180 AD. Some say it was the plague that finally claimed him, a grim reminder of the very crisis he'd spent a decade combating. Others speculated it was simply the weight of accumulated years and hardships. Either way, his passing marked the end of an era, both for Rome and the legacy of the philosopher-emperor. Marcus's deathbed scene wasn't the stuff of legend or cinema. No grand speeches or last-minute heroics. Instead, it was the quiet resignation of a man who understood that even emperors must face the ultimate Stoic lesson, mortality. It said he called for his advisors, gave a few final instructions, and then, in true Stoic fashion, accepted his fate with calm acceptance. If there was a silver lining, it was that he died knowing his philosophical musings, the meditations, would echo through the ages long after the clamor of his military campaigns had faded. As we sift through the ashes of Marcus's reign, it's tempting to paint him as the prototype for every inspirational quote you've ever seen on a sunset background. Indeed, his meditations have become a goldmine for self-help gurus and motivational speakers alike. Lines like, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts," could easily be at home on a modern-day Instagram post, complete with hashtags like #StoicWisdom and #EmperorGoals. Yet, while it's easy to romanticize Marcus as the ultimate guru of positivity, the reality is that his stoicism was born out of necessity, not novelty. His writings weren't about finding happiness, but about finding a way to endure the inevitable pain and chaos of life. The legacy of Marcus Aurelius isn't just the wisdom he left behind, but the way he lived it. His reign was a testament to the power of philosophy as a practical guide, not just an intellectual exercise. He wasn't just pondering the nature of virtue from a safe distance. He was applying it amidst political intrigue, warfare, and personal loss. Marcus wasn't the kind of ruler who indulged in lavish banquets while Rome burned. Instead, he was the one fretting over how to pay the legions and keep the people fed when the treasury was as empty as a forum at siesta time. But let's not gloss over the contradictions. For all his virtues, Marcus's decision to appoint Commodus as his successor was like handing the keys to the chariot to a speed-obsessed teenager. Commodus's reign would be marked by extravagance and misrule, a sharp departure from his father's Stoic pragmatism. It's easy to wonder, amidst the ruins of hindsight, whether Marcus ever regretted this choice. Perhaps it's a reminder that even the wisest among us can be blinded by the soft glow of familial love, or maybe he simply hoped that Commodus would rise to the occasion. As for Marcus's place in the pantheon of Stoicism, one might imagine him rolling his eyes at being canonized as a saint of serenity. The reality is, Marcus was human, as susceptible to doubt and despair as the rest of us. He might have chuckled at the notion of people deifying his words, knowing full well the messy realities from which they sprang. His Stoicism wasn't about achieving enlightenment. It was about surviving in a world that was often anything but rational. Yet, if there's one thing we can learn from Marcus, it's that wisdom isn't about having the answers, but knowing how to ask the right questions. His legacy is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find purpose in chaos, and the courage to lead with integrity, even when the world feels like a runaway chariot. The philosopher-emperor may have passed into the annals of history, but his words continue to resonate, a reminder that in the end, it's not the toga we wear, but the thoughts we think that define us. So, as we close the chapter on Marcus Aurelius, let's remember him not just as a ruler or a thinker, but as a man who navigated the stormy seas of life with a steady hand and an open heart. His story is a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty and change, there is a quiet strength to be found in the wisdom of the ages. Whether or not Marcus would have approved of his own sainthood in the Church of Stoicism, one thing is certain. His legacy, like the empire he once led, endures as a beacon of resilience, reason, and reflection in a world that often seems to have lost its way. In the shadowy jungles of Mesoamerica, where the air hangs thick like a humid blanket, the Mayans were busy inventing a writing system that would last longer than your average Hollywood marriage. Around 300 BCE, these folks started inscribing symbols that were far more significant than your teenage diary entries. That's right, the Mayan writing system was born, and it was about to change the game in ways that would echo across centuries. Now, you might think the Mayans woke up one day and thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to carve some symbols into stone? But the reality was more about necessity than novelty. Picture this. A civilization with a penchant for precision, needing to record everything from celestial events to lunch IOUs. While we lose sleep over unread emails, the Mayans were losing sleep over missing glyphs on stone tablets. These weren't mere doodles. They were the serious business of documenting a civilization's heartbeat. The Mayans weren't the first kids on the block to come up with writing. They had the Olmecs to look up to, who had already dabbled in symbols like an ancient prototype. But the Mayans took it up a notch, creating a system that could convey complex ideas, making sure their thoughts were as eternal as a bad tattoo decision. Their hieroglyphics were a blend of logograms and syllabic symbols, a sort of ancient linguistic cocktail that would later make archaeologists work harder than a caffeine-deprived barista. Let's talk practicality. The Mayans were the original bureaucrats of the ancient world, needing to keep tabs on everything. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and yes, even accountants. They needed a way to jot down astronomical data, dates, and important events with more precision than your phone's calendar app. The Mayans didn't just want to remember Grandma's birthday. They wanted to record when Venus would next appear in the sky, which, let's face it, is way cooler. Hieroglyphics were the Mayans' way of saying, we mean business. They carved these symbols into stone, painted them on murals, and inscribed them on pottery. Think of it as the ultimate ancient PowerPoint presentation, except with more artistry and fewer stock images. These symbols weren't just for show. They were an essential part of Mayan life, used in everything from religious ceremonies to political propaganda. The Mayan script was incredibly versatile. It allowed them to write about gods, kings, wars, and even gossip. They could document the rise and fall of dynasties or the latest celestial event with a finesse that would make today's journalists envious. And this was a civilization that took its writing seriously. No room for typos when your words are literally set in stone. Now, let's bust a few myths while we're at it. The romantic notion that the Mayans were isolated geniuses, inventing their writing system in a vacuum, is as fictional as a unicorn in a coffee shop. They were part of a bustling trade network, exchanging ideas and goods with neighboring cultures. The Mayans were cultural magpies, picking up influences and adapting them with their unique flair. They were more connected than your Wi-Fi signals at a crowded cafe. But don't let the romantic image of scholarly scribes fool you completely. The Mayans were also a society that enjoyed a good power play. Writing was a tool of control, a way to cement one's legacy, and occasionally to intimidate rivals. It wasn't just about recording history. It was about shaping perception. These glyphs could be as much about propaganda as they were about poetry. So, why does any of this matter? Well, the Mayan script offers us a window into a world that was as vibrant and complex as a modern metropolis. It shows us a people who were deeply curious about the universe, who used writing not just as a means of communication, but as a way to explore the cosmos and their place within it. The development of the Mayan writing system wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a cultural revolution. These symbols encapsulated everything from the mundane to the divine, capturing the essence of a civilization that was both advanced and enigmatic. The Mayans may have disappeared into the jungle mist, but their words remain etched in stone, a testament to human ingenuity and the timeless desire to leave a mark on history. Now, let's peel back the layers of the Mayan writing system, which could make an IKEA assembly manual look like a toddler's doodle. In a world where assembling a bookshelf can feel like solving a Rubik's Cube, the Mayan script was a linguistic masterpiece, combining elements that would baffle even the most seasoned cryptographer. At its core, the Mayan script was a dazzling mix of logograms and syllabic signs. Picture logograms like modern emojis. Each symbol represented an entire word or concept. Meanwhile, the syllabic signs were the building blocks of sounds, akin to the alphabet but way cooler and more complicated. Imagine trying to write banana using a combination of a single symbol for the fruit and another set of symbols for each syllable. Simple, right, not quite. The script was a linguistic labyrinth, designed to convey everything from mundane record-keeping to the grand narratives of gods and kings. Now, let's talk about the Mayans' penchant for carving their messages on just about anything that would stand still long enough. From the towering temples of Tikal to the intricately painted pottery that might have served as the ancient equivalent of your favorite coffee mug, the Mayans were all about documentation. If it was important, it ended up etched in stone. If it was mildly interesting, it probably found its way onto pottery. This wasn't just a fad. It was a practice steeped in the political and social fabric of Mayan life. When you're carving your history into limestone, you tend to make sure it's worth telling. But here's the kicker. Despite all this carving and inscribing, a persistent myth lingered like a bad plot twist. Many people believed the Mayan writing system was all about prophecy, predicting the future with more accuracy than a modern weather app. In reality, the script was more bureaucratic than mystical. Sure, they had their share of prophecies, but the bulk of the writing was as thrilling as an ancient tax return. Kings documented their exploits, cities kept records of trade and tributes, and astronomers noted celestial events with precision that would make NASA nod in approval. The Mayan script was less about crystal balls and more about keeping tabs on who's bringing what to the next feast. Speaking of which, the Mayans weren't just carving for the fun of it. Writing was a tool of power and influence, a way to assert dominance and ensure everyone knew who was in charge. These glyphs weren't just words. They were the ancient equivalent of a PR campaign. When a king wanted to boast about his latest conquest or lineage, he didn't send out a press release. He ordered it to be carved in stone, often accompanied by grandiose imagery that would make any Instagram influencer envious. And let's not forget the economic context that made all this possible. Stone carving was no casual hobby. It required resources, labor, and skill. A single inscription could take weeks or even months to complete, involving artisans who were the rock stars of their day. Pun intended. These craftsmen wielded the chisel with a precision that was as much art as it was science. This wasn't just about preserving history. It was about investing in a legacy, ensuring that the stories told would outlast the storytellers. Now, while the romantic notion of the Mayan script as a prophetic tool captures the imagination, the reality was much more grounded. The Mayans were highly practical, driven by the need to manage an empire that spanned 400,000 square kilometers, about the size of modern-day Sweden. As they expanded, so did their need for record-keeping. The script was a means of maintaining control over vast territories, a way to communicate orders, record transactions, and ensure the smooth operation of a civilization that was anything but simple. So, what have we learned here? The Mayan writing system was a marvel of complexity, a testament to human ingenuity that outshone the myths and legends that later shrouded it. It was a tool of bureaucracy, a symbol of power, and a work of art all rolled into one. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of this ancient script, it's clear that the Mayans were masters of more than just prophecy. They were masters of the written word, leaving behind a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire. And we're only just getting started on this journey through time. So stay tuned as we dig deeper into the world of the Mayans and their enigmatic script. So, as we continue our journey through the labyrinthine corridors of Mayan literacy, let's pause and appreciate the sheer audacity of it all. You see, Mayan society wasn't just about carving epic tales in stone. It was about who got to tell those tales in the first place. Spoiler alert. It wasn't your average Joe, or should I say, average Jaguar paw. Literacy in Mayan culture was as exclusive as a high-end speakeasy, complete with a secret handshake and a bouncer who probably knew more about astrology than your local horoscope writer. Now, here's a twist that would surprise the romantics among us. Not everyone in Mayan society was privy to the art of writing. While we might fancy the idea of bustling markets with literate merchants scribbling notes, the reality was more of a VIP-only club. The ability to read and write was largely confined to the elite, royalty, priests, and a select group of scribes who were the intellectual heavyweights of their time. These scribes were the unsung heroes behind the scenes, wielding their ink-tipped quills like social media managers with a penchant for propaganda. Let's break it down with some cold, hard data. We're talking about a civilization spread over 400,000 square kilometers. Yet only a sliver of its population could actually engage with the written word. Think of it like this. In a city as big as modern-day Miami, the literate elite would probably fit comfortably in a single banquet hall. The rest, they were likely left to interpret the hieroglyphs like ancient art critics, nodding along as if they understood the hidden depths of an abstract mural. This exclusivity meant that writing wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a symbol of power. If you could write, you could influence. Imagine a king wanting to legitimize his rule or remind everyone that he was, indeed, the big cheese. He'd have scribes craft a narrative that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor envious. These inscriptions weren't just historical accounts. They were carefully curated stories meant to sway public opinion and reinforce the divine right of kings. When a ruler wanted to flex his muscles, he didn't rely on a mere victory lap. He had his achievements immortalized in stone, ensuring his legacy was as unyielding as the limestone itself. And let's not forget the role of scribes as the ancient world's spin doctors. These guys were the ultimate multitaskers, scholars with a side gig in propaganda. They weren't just recording events. They were shaping them, deciding which narratives would stand the test of time and which would be consigned to obscurity. Imagine a scribe like an ancient PR representative, crafting tales that balanced truth and embellishment in a way that would make any modern novelist nod in understanding. These scribes weren't just chronicling history, they were curating it, ensuring that the right stories were etched in stone for all eternity. It's worth noting the economic context behind this literary stratification. Creating inscriptions was no small feat. It required resources, stone, tools, skilled artisans, and a whole lot of time. Each inscription was an investment, both financially and politically. When a king commissioned a stela or temple carving, it wasn't just about recording events. It was a statement of wealth and power, a tangible demonstration that he had the means to make his stories last. In a world without Twitter or TikTok, these inscriptions were the ultimate status update, a way to broadcast your accomplishments to anyone who happened to pass by, whether they could read it or not. Let's debunk a persistent myth while we're at it. The romantic notion that the Mayans were all literate, swapping notes over their morning cacao like a scene from a historical sitcom, is about as realistic as finding a Mayan glyph in your alphabet soup. The truth is, literacy was a privilege, not a right. For the majority of the population, the written word was a mysterious code, a series of symbols that hinted at divine mysteries and political edicts alike. It was a world where knowledge was power, and writing was the key to the kingdom, literally. But why does this matter? Well, understanding the exclusivity of literacy gives us a deeper insight into the social and political dynamics of Mayan society. It was a world where power was concentrated in the hands of a few, where the ability to write was as much a tool of control as it was a means of communication. The Mayan script wasn't just a way to record history. It was a mechanism for creating it, for ensuring that the stories that were told were the stories that mattered. As we unravel the intricacies of Mayan literacy, it's clear that this wasn't just about language. It was about legacy. The Mayans weren't just writing for the present. They were inscribing their way into the future, ensuring that their civilization would be remembered long after the jungle had reclaimed their cities. So, while the romantic image of a literate populace may linger, the reality is far more complex, and dare I say, more fascinating. Stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient enigma, delving deeper into the world of Mayan scribes and the pen, or chisel, that truly was mightier than the sword. As we delve into the decline of the Mayan writing system, let's set the scene. Imagine a world where the intricate glyphs that once narrated the grand tales of kings and cosmos began to fade like an ancient photograph left in the sun. Around 900 CE, the Mayan civilization found itself in the midst of a dramatic plot twist, political upheaval, environmental stress, and social shifts that would make any soap opera seem tame. It was as if the Mayan world was a grand chessboard, and someone had just appended the entire game. Now, before you start picturing a dramatic collapse worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster, let's break it down with some cold, hard facts. The decline wasn't a sudden fall off a cliff. It was more like a slow, inevitable descent down a rocky slope. By the 10th century, the once thriving cities of the southern lowlands, such as Tikal and Kapan, witnessed a gradual depopulation. This wasn't just about people packing their bags and leaving behind their stone-carved legacy. It was about the complex interplay of factors that would make any ancient historian's head spin. Climate change, for instance, played its part. The Mayans weren't just battling each other. They were up against Mother Nature herself. Prolonged droughts turned arable land into barren patches of dust, making agriculture as challenging as trying to grow a cactus in a snowstorm. Without crops, cities couldn't sustain their populations, leading to food shortages and, inevitably, social unrest. Imagine trying to maintain a thriving metropolis when your dinner plate is emptier than a rider's wallet at the end of the month. But environmental issues were only part of the story. The Mayans were also grappling with internal strife. Political fragmentation became the order of the day, as the unified state structures began to crumble like a stack of poorly shuffled playing cards. As city-states vied for dominance, the once coherent narrative carved into stelae and temples began to lose its plot. Rival factions, power struggles, and a shift in trade routes all contributed to a society teetering on the brink. Now, you might think the writing system would have been the last bastion of continuity, but it too faced its own existential crisis. As the political centers shifted, so did the focus of cultural expression. The scribes, those ancient spin doctors, found themselves with fewer patrons and less motivation to carve tales of glory and conquest. The Mayan script, once the pride of the civilization, began to fall silent amidst the chaos. Fast forward a few centuries to the 16th century and enter the Spanish conquistadors, history's version of a cultural wrecking ball. With the arrival of the Spanish, the Mayan writing system faced its final blow, like a once great opera house reduced to rubble. The Spanish, armed with their own brand of cultural superiority, embarked on a mission of cultural rebranding, and let's just say it wasn't about updating logos or catchy slogans. It was more akin to an aggressive corporate takeover, where the indigenous culture was systematically dismantled. The Spanish conquest wasn't just about swords and crossbows. It was about erasing the very identity of the civilizations they encountered. The conquistadors weren't content with merely conquering land. They aimed to conquer minds. And what better way to do that than by obliterating the symbols of Mayan literacy? The Spanish, in their infinite wisdom, viewed the Mayan glyphs as pagan symbols to be stamped out, like an unwelcome insect in the pantry of colonial expansion. Cue the infamous burning of books and manuscripts, a scene that would make any bibliophile weep. In 1562, Diego de Landa, a Spanish bishop with a penchant for cultural cleansing, ordered the destruction of thousands of Mayan codices, reducing centuries of knowledge to ash. In his quest to save souls, he inadvertently consigned a civilization's history to oblivion. It was cultural vandalism on a grand scale, leaving behind a legacy of loss that modern historians still lament. But let's bust a few myths while we're at it. The decline of Mayan literacy wasn't solely due to internal collapse or environmental woes. It was actively suppressed by the colonizers. The Spanish didn't just stumble upon a decaying culture. They actively dismantled it, piece by piece. They weren't just conquerors. They were cultural erasers, intent on rewriting the narrative to suit their own ends. It was less about the Mayans losing their literacy, and more about it being forcibly taken from them, like a prized possession snatched away in the dead of night. So, why does this matter? Well, understanding the decline of the Mayan writing system offers a sobering lesson in the fragility of cultural heritage. It shows us that history isn't just shaped by internal forces, but can be dramatically altered by external ones, often with devastating consequences. The Mayan script wasn't just a casualty of time. It was a victim of colonial ambition, a testament to the power dynamics that have shaped human history. In the end, the Mayan writing system wasn't just an ancient artifact. It was a vibrant expression of a civilization that found itself caught in the crosshairs of history. As we peel back the layers of this complex narrative, it becomes clear that the decline of Mayan literacy was as much about the loss of a voice as it was about the loss of a language. And while the romantic notion of a civilization fading quietly into the jungle might capture the imagination, the reality is far more complex, and dare I say, more tragic. But fear not, dear listener, for our journey through the annals of Mayan history doesn't end here. We've unraveled the threads of decline and destruction, but there are still tales to be told, mysteries to be uncovered, and legacies to be reclaimed. So stay tuned as we continue to explore the enigmatic world of the Mayans, piecing together the remnants of a civilization that once danced to the rhythm of its own glyphs. But the Mayan story doesn't end with the Spanish conquest's heavy hand clamping down on their culture. Fast forward to the 20th century, where the Mayan script made a comeback more dramatic than a washed-up celebrity landing a reality show. This revival is a tale of rediscovery, as thrilling as a treasure hunt led by a team of tenacious linguists and archaeologists who refuse to let sleeping glyphs lie. Enter the scene, a Russian soldier-turned-linguist named Yuri Norizov. In the 1950s, Norizov cracked the code of the Mayan script from his cozy post in the Soviet Union, proof that you don't need to be in the jungle to uncover its secrets. Armed with a magnifying glass and a determination that could rival any detective, Norizov deciphered the script's syllabic nature, challenging the Western scholars who had been barking up the wrong linguistic tree for decades. The plot thickens as we meet Tatyana Praskuryakov, an American archaeologist whose work in the 1960 and 70 added layers of depth to our understanding of Mayan history. Praskuryakov's meticulous studies of stelae, those towering stone monuments inscribed with hieroglyphs, revealed that these weren't just artistic expressions, but historical records detailing the lives of Mayan rulers. Her insights turned the narrative from a jumbled mess into a coherent chronicle, pulling back the curtain on a civilization that had been misunderstood for centuries. Now let's talk about the modern implications of this newfound understanding. Imagine a cultural revival that breathes life into a script once thought lost to time, like resurrecting a forgotten language from the dusty annals of history. Today, Mayan communities across Mexico and Central America are reclaiming this script, using it to reconnect with their ancestral roots. Schools are teaching students to read and write in the ancient script, transforming dusty glyphs into vibrant symbols of identity and pride. But this isn't just about feel-good cultural revival. The decipherment of the Mayan script has had profound implications for historical accuracy. Archaeologists and historians now have a clearer picture of Mayan society, economy, and politics, offering insights as rich and layered as a chocolate torte. They can finally piece together the rise and fall of dynasties, the ebb and flow of trade networks, and the intricate ceremonial practices that defined this ancient world. The economic context is particularly revealing. With a better understanding of Mayan glyphs, we can see how trade routes snake their way through the jungles, connecting city-states like a web of ancient highways. The script reveals tributes paid, alliances formed, and goods exchanged, an ancient ledger that would make any modern accountant nod in appreciation. Such revelations are a stark reminder that even in the ancient world, the economy was a force to be reckoned with, shaping power dynamics in ways that resonate with today's global markets. Let's not forget the political landscape. The ability to decipher the Mayan script has uncovered stories of kings and queens, their conquests and defeats, their alliances and betrayals. It's like binge-watching a series where each episode reveals another layer of intrigue and ambition. These stories, once locked in stone, now speak to us with a clarity that echoes through time, reshaping our understanding of what it meant to rule in the ancient world. So, what would the Mayans think of all this? Imagine a scribe from the golden age of Mayan civilization transported to a modern university lecture hall, watching as students decode the glyphs he so carefully inscribed. Would he be bemused, flattered, or perhaps a bit indignant that it took us this long to catch on? Picture him raising an eyebrow at the sight of young scholars poring over his work, dissecting each twist and turn of ancient politics with the enthusiasm of a plot twist-obsessed fan. It's a testament to the enduring power of the written word, proving that even after centuries of silence, the Mayan script still has stories to tell. And while the romantic notion of a civilization lost to the jungle's embrace lingers, the reality is far more compelling. The Mayans were architects of their destiny, carving their legacy into stone with a precision and artistry that still resonates today. As we wrap up our journey through the labyrinth of Mayan literacy, it's clear that the rediscovery of the ancient script is more than just an academic triumph. It's a cultural renaissance that bridges the past and present, connecting us to a civilization that, despite its decline, refused to fade into obscurity. The Mayan script is no longer a forgotten relic. It is a living testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the timeless desire to leave a mark on history. So, the next time you find yourself at a crossroads of history and mystery, think of the Mayans, whose glyphs have transcended time to tell their tale. And remember, while the past may be a foreign country, its stories are ours to discover, decode, and celebrate. Until next time, keep exploring the hidden corridors of the past, where the echoes of ancient voices still whisper secrets of civilizations gone by.